Chapter 670. After saying this, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Fine. If you kill him, you will be my enemy. I won't kill him. I won't kill him, okay?" Shang Guanyu shook her head, her eyes filled with sadness. "Don't you understand? Don't you understand?" As she said this, her right hand suddenly formed a sign, and a faint golden light flowed around her body. Seeing this, Dong Haijun frowned and shouted in a low voice, "Withdraw!" Shang Guanyu shouted, "Zhao Zijing, don't you dare!" Now that things had come to this point, why would Lord Donghai not dare to do anything? The water-repelling light shield suddenly expelled Dong Haijun, and instantly shrank into a fist-sized bead, trapping Shang Guanyu inside. Her voice suddenly became softer, as if she had been thrown to the edge of the sky, but the golden light inside the shield shone brightly, as if a small sun was trapped inside. Crimson cracks appeared one after another on the surface of the cover that had shrunk into a ball, but they quickly flowed like water and calmed down. Dong Haijun held the ball in his palms. The wounds on his face and wrists had healed. The tent was originally dark and gloomy, but now the small ball in his palms shone brightly, making his face look gloomy and ferocious. Although he did not have many treasures in his hands, this water-repelling light shield was one of the special ones. The tent of the commander of an army was the most heavily guarded place. As for the light barrier in his tent, it was the strongest of the strongest. Shang Guanyu's cultivation was not low, but how could she break free in a short time when she was trapped in such a thing? With Dong Haijun's constant demon power pouring in from the outside? She shouted and scolded, but Dong Haijun was no longer submissive like before. Because of the fear of losing something, he was now determined and unshakable. This stalemate lasted for about half an hour, and the golden light in the small ball finally faded. Dong Haijun looked inside, and could only see Shang Guanyu shrouded in a cloud of mist. He couldn't see her figure or face. He sighed and raised his hand to cast a restriction on the ball, turning it black, and then slowly put it down. His body suddenly withered, and he sat in the mud at the bottom of the sea. Just like that, after about a quarter of an hour, a personal guard suddenly came in from outside the tent to report. "Juanshang," Lord Donghai said weakly, "get lost." But after a while, the bodyguard still hadn't left. He then said, "Yes." He raised his eyebrows, scram. However, the curtain was suddenly parted and a person walked in. Lord Donghai was agitated and stood up abruptly, but he realized that the person who came was Huang Guanzi. He was stunned. After a while he said, "You, sir? Why are you here? Didn't I tell you to stay on the island? What happened?" Huang Guanzi frowned slightly and glanced at the tent. Inside the water-repelling essence light shield, there was originally a luxurious room. But now that the shield was in the hands of Lord Donghai, the tent was stuck in the mud of the seabed. The Dragon King of the East Sea fell to the ground. Now that he stood up, he couldn't even shake off the dirt on his body. Huang Guanzi then shook his head. "Don't worry, Junshang. Nothing happened on the island. I was worried that something had happened here, so I rushed over." His eyes fell on the small ball in his hand. "I heard that a master from Penglai went straight to the Central Army. What happened?" Lord Donghai was relieved, but soon a look of despair appeared on his face, and he sat down again. "Alas, nothing happened on the island. Alas, what's the use now? Alas, 1,000 years ago, I didn't want to be this Dragon King. Alas, the Divine Lord chose me. Alas, if I hadn't gone to the Dragon Island, I wouldn't have become this Dragon King. If I hadn't become this Dragon King, I wouldn't have met little you. If I hadn't met little you, I wouldn't have such a sad thing today." Huang Guanzi frowned and looked at him. Only after he had rambled on like this, and told her everything that had just happened, did he suddenly raise his eyebrows and shout, "Fool!" Lord Donghai was stunned. In the past year, when had he ever seen Huang Guanzi make such an expression and say such rude words? In his shock, he even forgot to be angry. Huang Guanzi ignored him, took 4 steps in the tent, turned around and shouted at him again. His voice was stern. "I have been assisting Lord Donghai for a year, just to see you like this? Listen to what you are saying. Stop fighting. Stop fighting at sea. Return to seclusion. Hee hee." He sneered and pointed at Lord Donghai. "That woman is too soft-hearted. Are you confused? If you stop fighting, can you live? Can she live? Let me ask you, are you really sincere to her? Lord Donghai was dumbfounded by the storm of questions. After a while, he said slowly, Of course I am sincere to her. I have told you a lot about me and her over the past year. Do you still doubt my sincerity? Lord Donghai, now I have to doubt it. Huang Guanzi looked at him. If you are sincere to her, you should think about what is the best for her and how you can give her this kind of kindness. If you don't even bother to think about these things, only feel sad, wronged, and give up everything, you are not really good to her. You just mistook your kindness for love. A man, Huang Guanzi clenched his teeth, should make up for his mistakes. Instead of bemoaning and remorseful, he should be holding up the sky, not letting the sky collapse. A man, he paused and took a deep breath. Even if he is misunderstood, as long as he can know his mistakes, as long as he can face his own conscience. So what if he has to bear the infamy? Lord Donghai looked at him and slowly stood up. Sir, you. Huang Guanzi restrained his expression. Do you understand, Lord Donghai? The Dragon King of Donghai looked at the small ball in his palm, and then at Huang Guanzi. Sir, please teach me what to do. The counselor from the Freemasonry finally relaxed a little. I dare not teach. I just give some suggestions to Lord Donghai. Sir, please speak. We are here for Li Yunxin, for the entrance to the netherworld. Huang Guanzi softened his tone and said in a low voice, There is no conflict between Lord Donghai and Lady Mingyue about the entrance to the netherworld. We even have common interests. Only in the matter of Li Yunxin. Lord Donghai has a demon body and was transformed into a dragon king by Lord Shinryu. He can't remember his parents, and he doesn't have any children, let alone this kind of emotional inheritance. He can't understand the relationship between mother and son. Love can be fated. Alas. In fact, how many people in the world can understand it? Just think about Lady Mingyue, my lord. Many times, a person can't completely understand another person, so you just need to respect her thoughts. She doesn't want Li Yunxin to die. We have come to this point, but we don't want him to die either, do we? On the contrary. Huang Guanzi shook his head. We still need to lead people to save him. What about after that? Provoking the remaining 7 Dragon Kings to fight among themselves and asking Li Yunxin to kill them one by one. Isn't that also helping him? Li Yunxin said that he did all this to protect himself and to help the Dragon King succeed. Neither you nor I believe it. But the alliance between the strong is like this. Before the dagger is revealed, the alliance is unbreakable. Lord Donghai will be in power and glory after he has done all these things. With the capital to negotiate with Li Yunxin, isn't it up to you to kill him or not? Hearing this, Lord Donghai pondered for a while, and finally his expression lightened. But soon he frowned. But sir, you want Li Yunxin. Even if I don't kill him, it won't be you and I who conspired to kill him. Huang Guanzi smiled. The entrance to the netherworld is big. Wanting Li Yunxin is just taking advantage of the situation and taking revenge. I advise Jun Shang not to be swayed by emotions. Could it be that I would be the opposite? Rest assured, Lord. Since Madame Mingyue's worry about Li Yunxin may affect my plan with you, then let's put the matter of revenge aside for the time being. We will get the entrance to the netherworld first, and then, after this matter, the Freemasonry and Donghai will discuss the matter of Li Yunxin. At that time, whether Lord Donghai will protect him for Madame Mingyue or continue to cooperate with us is also up to you. Lord Donghai opened his mouth, wanting to say something but stopped. Huang Guanzi waved his hand and smiled. I have told you just now. The alliance between the strong does not require that all the parties have the same goal. Alas, although I am congenial to you, but there is still a subtle difference in our positions. When the day really comes when we meet on the battlefield, if Juanshang wins, on account of our friendship today, allow me to join you and continue to serve Juanshang. These words sounded sincere. Even Lord Donghai was moved and blurted out. Then why don't you? Huang Guanzi's face was solemn. Although I am not a gentleman, I also know that there are things that should be done and things that should not be done. Lord Donghai took a deep breath and bowed deeply to him. Mister's integrity, wisdom, and demeanor are all admirable. If there is such a day, I will help you conquer the border and guard the ocean forever." Huang Guanzi returned the bow. Then Lord Donghai, please continue to advance. Previously, Lord Haohan did not order the whole army to attack for the sake of his own reputation, but it backfired and made him lose face. Today they retreated 100 miles and reorganized for a day. I think they are reviving their morale, and their offensive will be fierce. That Li Yunqin put himself in a dead end, which is a wise move. But if he does not receive help, he will become a joke. The situation is urgent, Lord Donghai. Please set off immediately. Lord Donghai straightened his body. With a slight shake, his robe became bright again. Also, please continue to guard Penglai for me. Then he strode out of the tent, and quickly began to shout and dispatch. Huang Guanzi stood in the tent for a while. Suddenly, he raised his face and closed his eyes. Then he let out a long sigh and flicked his sleeves. Chapter 671. Lord Donghai has been in the Sea Tiger Gorge for a full day and a half. But the surface of the East Sea is not completely unguarded. As early as the army set off, he has sent orders to all places to strengthen their vigilance. The sea is vast and there are many aquatic creatures. Since the demons are aquatic creatures, it is easy to communicate with their own kind, and they are easy to control. Therefore, in fact, many seemingly ordinary and mindless fish, shrimps, whales and dolphins in the East Sea have become spies. Under such a strict defense, it is difficult for anyone to get rid of surveillance. Of course, it is another matter whether they can be stopped or not. Red Lady is entrusted by Li Yunqin to stop the owner of Southwood House. Although she only needs to stop one person, it is not easy to do on the sea. She uses several treasures brought from Dongting, and sets up defenses on the sea and seabed with her own supernatural power. These defenses are probably only for the strong. If one only looks at Wacken and ignores the difference in material form, the sea and the sky now look like a net. Although the Wacken flow in the net is violent and chaotic, as a whole, it is still a whole piece. People with low realms can't cause any waves in this net, just like small fish and shrimps slip out of the net. But the strong above the true realm and the mysterious realm are like whales and dolphins. No matter what, they will touch this net and be noticed. Red Lady spins such a net along the eastern coast like a spider. Then she begins to wait on a reef protruding from the sea. She naturally knows that her whereabouts may also be known by the demons of the East Sea, but she doesn't care. She has the dragon soul. Even if it has not been completely integrated, it is enough for her to look down upon any existence in the world. During the waiting period, she finds many interesting things. For example, a few demons were hiding somewhere nearby. A small demon was transforming somewhere. Or a murder had occurred on a ship near the coast. And a few sailors had killed the ship's owner and thrown his body into the sea, then discussed to disguise it as a shipwreck. But there is still no sign of the strong, so she continues to wait. Therefore, she does not notice some inconspicuous people a little farther away. About 400 paces from the rock on which she stood, and about 100 paces from the land, there was a skiff on the surface of the sea. Compared to those big ships that sailed far away, it was an extremely small ship. It was similar to the ferry boat used by the inland fishermen on a small river. The hull of the ship was a single entity. Although it was made of wood, it did not seem to have been pieced together. It was more like a piece of wood had been melted and molded into this shape. At the bow of the ship stood a woman with a shocking beauty. She wore a lake blue chiffon dress, and her black hair was loosely tied. If the former Qing emperor was here, he would be pleasantly surprised. It was the Taoist Qing Shui who had lived in the capital for 1,000 years that he thought about day and night. Although this place was not far from land, the sea had already turned a deep blue. Originally, there were still waves and wind, but now they seemed to be suppressed by some kind of power. The surface of the water within 100 meters was as smooth as a mirror, and even the air seemed to have solidified. She raised her head slightly and looked towards the east with a calm expression. In that direction were Red Lady, Lord of Donghai, Penglai Island, a vast army, and Li Yunqin on the stone pillar. In fact, she had been watching like this for 2 whole days. From the departure of the vast army, to Li Yunxin breaking the formation and killing the enemy, to the retreat of the vast army. It had been a whole day of reorganization. After a while, Taoist Qingshui raised her hand. The chiffon dress fell down, revealing a snow-white forearm. This arm was so slender that it seemed to break with a light snap. However, her fingers flicked lightly in the void like plucking a string, and a strange vibration appeared in the whole space. It did not seem to be any kind of known magical power. It was more like playing a zither. After about 3 or 4 flicks, she frowned slightly. It seemed that she was not satisfied with the result. She touched the void again, and a zither with only 5 strings appeared in front of her. At this time, she stretched out her hand and plucked on the strings. A quiet and solemn sound came out, and even made the whole sea tremble slightly. At the same time, golden ripples suddenly appeared in the air around Red Lady, who was standing 400 li away from them. It was as if the space had turned into metal and then melted. Then it was shaken by some strong force. With a buzz, her red robe flew up. The female monster in Dongting was shocked. She immediately turned to look to the west. In the next moment, the reef beneath her feet shattered into pieces, and she disappeared without a trace. The super monster at the peak of Xian realm felt the information sent from 400 meters away. It was hard to judge whether it was good or bad based on the information alone. But what shocked her was that she did not feel any fluctuation of Wacom before. The methods of cultivators and monsters were extremely magical and unpredictable in the eyes of mortals. For example, making a fire out of thin air 100 steps away by making a hand gesture. Mortals didn't know how to ignite it without firewood or oil. However, in the eyes of magical people, monster power and Wacom power were like a line. It came from the body, shot 100 steps away, and then burst into fire. However, the changes around her didn't follow this rule. It was more like the whole space suddenly changed. The surrounding Wacom power vibrated for no reason, and there was no defense at all. The newcomer was showing her power. When Red Lady, who turned into a red light, rushed to the mirror-like sea, Taoist Qingshui put her fingers on the strings of the zither. Seeing the aggressiveness of the newcomer, she didn't change her expression. She took back her fingers. Another clear zheng sound rang out, releasing a feather sound. Red Lady suddenly stopped in the air. She was only 10 feet away from Taoist Qingshui. 4 high-level cultivators and monsters. A distance of 10 feet was like face to face. However, the female monster didn't seem to be restricted. It was more like she was moved out of the space where Taoist Qingshui was. She could move freely, and her monster power was not sealed. However, she couldn't move forward anymore. She could only make slight ripples on the sea, like shaking a steel plate. Red Lady quickly realized this point. She simply stopped in the air and stared at Taoist Qingshui like a beast hunting its prey. You? Are you the owner of Southwood House? Li Yunxin forbade you to go to him. Go. Taoist Qingshui looked at Red Lady carefully. If others looked at this female monster like this, she would have been angry. But now she knew she couldn't figure out the opponent's method, so she couldn't vent her anger. She just raised her eyebrows and stared at her. What are you looking at? Taoist Qingshui's face showed a trace of smile. What an overbearing little female monster. You're dead, but your obsession still exists for so long. Don't you know that this isn't a good thing? Red Lady looked at her angrily. What nonsense are you talking about? Taoist Qingshui looked down and used her slender middle finger to gently slide on the strings. Little girl, you're already dead. It's just that it's common for mortals to die without knowing they're dead. But it's rare for a monster to die. Now your body and mind are formed by the dragon soul. The reason why you can remember the past and your deep love for Li Yunxin is because of your obsession, causing you to sink into the sea of bitterness and unable to escape. Sigh. She spoke very softly and slowly. Now that she sighed, it was like a cool breeze blowing on her face. Red Lady didn't know why the owner of Southernwood House didn't say anything about Li Yunxin the moment she saw her, but said a bunch of inexplicable things. She wanted to scold her loudly, but her anger slowly calmed down. She even felt that her body was soaked in a pool of warm water. It was so comfortable that she almost lost her strength. Taoist Qingshui looked at the strings and shook her head. Lord Dongting wants you to fuse with the dragon soul. But he doesn't know that there's no way to fuse with the dragon soul. Right now, your obsession and the dragon soul are stuck together like glue. It's not solid. Time is passing. There will be a crack in the end. If this goes on, there are only two situations. She gently stroked the strings. Either your obsession is destroyed, you forget everything in the past, and become a walking corpse with only strength. Or, your obsession with Li Yunxin wins over the dragon soul, and you're separated from the dragon soul again. You're still you, but you've lost all your strength. Speaking until here, she looked at Red Lady. Little girl, that's why the Dragon Island Master isn't in a hurry to take away your things. So, what kind of result do you want? Red Lady suddenly felt tired in her heart. She had never heard of what Taoist Qingshui said. Now that she heard it, she should be shocked, angry or suspicious. But when those soft words entered her ears, it was as if she already knew it. But she just mentioned it now. Because of this subtle emotion, she felt powerless. The sea and sky in front of her seemed to have changed. It was originally a vast sea and a clear sky. It should make people feel open-minded and only want to sail to the end of the world. But now, she felt that the sea was terrifyingly empty, and the water was terrifyingly deep. The sun in the sky was even more dazzling, making people panic. The vast world made her feel incomparably small. She wanted to find a safe corner, but there was nowhere to hide. Her fluttering clothes and flying hair slowly calmed down. Her eyes became a little dazed, and her anger almost completely disappeared. Red Lady frowned and looked at Taoist Qingshui. Why, however, there was something wrong with it. She felt that something was wrong. A stubborn but resolute thought in his heart was making a sound and shouting in his heart. Even though the shout was suppressed by Taoist Qingshui's words, it still didn't stop. It was this sound that made her feel, things shouldn't be like this. Something's not right. Taoist Qingshui smiled. She was about to speak again, but Red Lady's eyes fell on her zither. Most zither nowadays were 7-stringed, but this one was 5-stringed. But Red Lady had traveled the world before. She knew that zither were 5-stringed before 2,000 years ago, and 2 strings were added later. She was the princess of Dongting, and her father was also a person who loved elegance and prosperity. Therefore, she learned how to play zither, and knew the theory of zither. She knew that the 5-stringed zither gong, shang, jiao and zhenyu also corresponded to the 5 elements: earth, metal, wood, fire and water. Now Taoist Qingshui was playing the zhenyu. The zhenin belonged to fire, and could enter the heart. Chapter 672. Once she realized this, the tiredness in her heart suddenly dissipated. Taoist Qingshui was messing with her mind. Her body couldn't move forward, but she found the space around her was slightly vibrating. Taoist Qingshui's supernatural power was strange. It seemed to send her into another space. But once she noticed this detail, she knew that Taoist Qingshui couldn't completely forbid anything. Red Lady scolded. What does it have to do with you? Shut up. With this shout, the demon power of the female monster at the peak of Xian realm surged and burst out. When she rushed over, Taoist Qingshui stopped her with the sound of feathers. But the force still made the surrounding sea slightly tremble. At this moment, he suddenly exerted his full strength. Although he still couldn't break through the restrictive spell laid down by the other party, it caused the sea surface to shake like boiling water. It also caused ripples to appear in the air that was originally almost frozen. A light sound was heard. The strings on Taoist Qingshui's zither were broken. She didn't know what the strings were made of. Once they were broken, they became 2 extremely thin but extremely hard steel wires, like 2 extremely long needles. One of them actually cut Taoist Qingshui's middle finger. A drop of blood appeared on the tip of her finger. Taoist Qingshui looked down and flicked it away. What a determined little girl. She sighed softly. If you were born as a human, you would be a genius in cultivation. Unfortunately, you were born as a demon. She suddenly looked up at Red Lady, and quickly plucked the horn string with her index finger. Do you know that Li Yunxin is just like his name? His heart is not only unpredictable, but also belongs to someone else. The sound of horns belonged to the wood element and entered the liver. Red Lady wanted to shout again. But when she heard this sound, She suddenly felt as if a monstrous wave was set off on the surface of the sea, pressing straight towards her. Even though she knew it was not real, she couldn't help but look at the non-existent wave. She took a closer look, and knew it was not a wave. It was clearly an indescribable sorrow and despair that could not be expressed in words. Her aura collapsed once again, and she subconsciously tried to hide. But there was no wave for her to hide, and where could she hide to? The huge wave hit her. Red Lady cried out in pain and fell from the sky. Your obsession makes you live, but also makes you suffer. Taoist Qingshui used her finger to play the string. The sound of the horn was deep and mellow, lingering for a long time. It was as if waves were surging up one after another, continuously bombarding Red Lady's body. Li Yunxin thought that me coming to the East Sea would be disadvantageous to him. So he asked you to stop me. But doesn't he know that stopping me is even more dangerous than facing the vast army? You have him in your heart, but he might not have you in his heart. Can you prove his sincerity with your sincerity? Even if his sincerity can be proven, if one day he cuts it off, can you cut off your obsession? Taoist Clearwater's robe started to flutter. Her words became rapid, but her fingers left the strings. He calmly looked at Red Lady, who was in a daze on the hard surface of the sea for a good while before he softly said, Li Xianyu, I can ferry you, but you have to cross yourself first. Leave the East Sea temporarily, and let me save him this time. Red Lady frowned, her eyes were full of sorrow. Her voice lost its previous imposing manner, and became like a woman who was heartbroken, but still tried to hold on to a glimmer of hope. But, I can also save him. Why must it be you? Taoist Clearwater shook her head slightly. Your strength is not enough. Your strength is not suitable for him. She paused and looked towards the east. The vast army is about to make a move. If you stop me here, his life will be in more danger. Think about it. Do you listen to him, or do you bend for him? Red Madam stared blankly. His life, his life, his life. When she heard these words just like before, a voice suddenly rang out in her heart. She was even more stunned and frowned. He told me. Red Lady leaned on the hard surface of the sea and shook her head slightly. He told me about this matter. Taoist Clearwater frowned slightly for the first time. This demoness was stubborn and strong-willed. She had used 4 out of 5 notes, and she had already broken it once. But looking at the current situation, she had not completely subdued her, and instead, there was a counterattack. But there was no reason for this. Whether it was Lord Dongting's method, Red Lady's fortuitous encounter, or Li Yunxin's entrustment, none of them were enough for her to have unexpected abilities. Then the question was it because of the word heart? The word heart was indeed the most difficult to predict. Taoist Clearwater seemed to be able to subdue Red Lady effortlessly. The battle between high-level cultivators and great demons was always earth-shattering. Only when there was a huge disparity in strength, or when it was just a friendly contest, would there be such a situation. But in fact, according to Taoist Clearwater, although Red Lady belonged to the category of not completely fused with the dragon soul, the power of the Xian realm that she displayed was not to be underestimated. Now that she used such a method, it was not as easy as it looked. But it was still not enough to completely subdue her. Red Lady said in a low voice. But he told me that this matter concerns his life. Taoist Clearwater heaved a sigh of relief. If you continue to block me here, his life will indeed be in danger. But Red Lady seemed to be gripped by some kind of paranoid emotion. She restrained the terrifying demonic power in her body, and unconsciously repeated Taoist Clearwater's last sentence. His life will be in danger. His life will be in danger. As she said this, she slowly raised her head and looked towards the east blankly. But he said if you go over, his life will be in danger. Taoist Clearwater raised her hand and placed it on the 5th string. He is involved in this situation, so he can't see the whole picture. What he said may not be true. But, Red Lady turned to look at her. You are even afraid of me. What are you going to use? Her eyes were originally dim because of the great sorrow. However, when Taoist Qingshui mentioned Li Yunxin's life, the melancholy in her eyes seemed to be pulled and bitten by a stubborn force. Following her words, the melancholy in her eyes quickly faded away. Red Lady raised her head. The light in her eyes gradually became clear. What are you going to use to save him? Her voice was like tearing silk, almost tearing the sea and the sky apart. No one knew where the female monster got her amazing strength from. She suddenly stretched her hands forward. The originally calm and solid sea seemed to have suddenly melted. The rolling waves were lifted up by her strength and directly rushed towards Taoist Clearwater's small boat. The vanguard of this huge force was an even more powerful sound wave. Previously, Red Lady used the sound wave to break one of Taoist Clearwater's zither strings. Now this sound wave was even fiercer and more than 10 times more powerful than before. Bang! A loud explosion was heard. The guqin in front of Taoist Qingshui was shattered into pieces and even scratched her face. Now Red Lady was like a ferocious beast that was restrained on an iron plate. This ferocious beast was previously weak, but now she was energetic again. Although it was still bound, it had already caused the entire iron plate to start to shake. The calm sea had once again become turbulent. Taoist Clearwater's zither was destroyed, so she couldn't even play the fifth note. The small boat under her feet was still intact, but it was also shaking in the waves as if it was about to capsize. When the zither exploded, it created a terrifying airwave that enveloped Taoist Qingshui. When the rolling airwave arrived, it dispersed the airwave. Now, she didn't look as calm as before. There were bloodstains on her face and arms, and even her lake blue gauze dress was torn. Red Lady was startled by this scene. How could a person who could suppress a great monster at the peak of Xian realm have such a fragile body? But after this shock, she was even more shocked. When the waves that were stirred up by her blasted Taoist Clearwater and the small boat under her feet, her whole appearance changed. Taoist Clearwater's body suddenly shone with golden light, and on her face, arms, and the wounds caused by the broken pieces also shone with golden light. It was as if the blood flowing in her body wasn't blood, but was really filled with golden light. Red Lady was no stranger to such a scene. Li Yunqin, the current her, once she was injured, she would always be like this. What is this Taoist Clearwater? Is it also Longzi's? Chapter 673. While Red Lady was shocked, Taoist Qingshui pressed her hand down and suppressed the surface of the ocean again. At this time, her temperament was completely different. Taoist Qingshui was extremely beautiful. She wore light clothes and her hair was like a waterfall. It was as if she was taking a leisurely walk in her own room in Chengdu, or Jinghua instead of the battlefield. But now, although her appearance didn't change much, her details had changed subtly. Her hair was spread out. Although it was still smooth and not messy, it also caused her originally calm temperament to decrease by a third. The pupils in her eyes became a little thin. Although they didn't shrink into a line when Dragon Sun was angry, they became oval, like a cat in a bad mood. Therefore, these pupils also added a bit of demonic temperament to her temperament. The thin clothes were shattered by the waves raised by Red Lady. However, a layer of faintly discernible armor appeared beneath it. But if you looked carefully, it didn't seem to be armor, but scales growing on her body. Although Red Lady, who was at the peak of Xian realm, couldn't seriously injure Taoist Qingshui, she had to use some means and show her face to deal with it. You. Red Lady frowned and looked at her in surprise. Aren't you the owner of Southernwood House? If you want me to be, then I am. Taoist Qingshui pressed her hands down again, and the surface of the ocean became a piece of iron plate again. But this time, Red Lady was excluded. The area within 100 miles became a wizardry barrier, and Taoist Qingshui was shrouded in it. Red Lady was no longer restrained, but she couldn't come in. This seemed to mean that Taoist Qingshui admitted the strength of the female monster, and believed that she might be a substantial threat to her. Such a discovery made Red Lady feel proud. She raised her eyebrows. It turns out that you were just pretending before. Today I'm here, so don't think you can escape. But Taoist Qingshui only showed a fleeting and slightly mocking smile on her face. Little girl, I just can't control you. Not that I can't kill you. Previously, I called you here just to avoid the fight and trouble in the east. I wanted to make things clear to you here. Alas, it seems now that you are strong-willed. That is both a good and a bad thing. How to deal with you is a headache. Her words sounded like she was trying to be brave, but it was not entirely a bluff. Hong Myangzi had set up an inescapable net here. But this Taoist Qing Shui stopped at the shore of the East Sea. If he took another step forward, he would step into her net and be noticed by her. However, releasing a message to ask her to come over was indeed what she meant in her words. However, the demoness sneered. I'll show you my power first. Previously, she was trapped by Taoist Qing Shui's zither music. She had the strength, but could not use it. It could be said that she was extremely aggrieved. Now that he was free, his temper flared up. When a peak profound realm demon made a move, the weather would change, and heaven and earth would topple. But what Taoist Qing Shui said was true. Red Lady attacked with all her strength for a quarter of an hour. But this time, not even a ripple appeared on the sea under Taoist Qing Shui's feet. It seemed to be because previously, Taoist Qing Shui had used some kind of method to separate Red Lady from this world and wrap her up. But now that he couldn't control her, he simply wrapped himself up. This method was naturally easy to use on herself. And the power was more than 100 times stronger. She calmly watched Red Madam tossing and turning for a while before saying in a low voice, Li Chunfeng, should I kill your son's helper? Red Lady saw that her attack was not effective, so she gave up. But hearing Taoist Qing Shui's words, she immediately frowned. What? Who are you talking to? But Taoist Qing Shui ignored her at the moment. Red Lady was about to scold again, but she saw a person rushing from the east and shouting in a low voice, Master, please don't kill her. She took a closer look. It was a middle-aged scholar with a very wretched appearance. Who else could it be but Huang Guanzi in the tent of King of East Sea? But Red Lady didn't know his identity. She only thought that he was an assistant called by Taoist Qing Shui. So she used her demon power to blow him down. Unexpectedly, this person was also very powerful. Although it was just a casual blow from a female monster, who was at the peak of Xian realm, the power was not to be underestimated. But he actually withstood it. After withstanding the blow, he flashed into Taoist Qing Shui's inhibition spell. Red Lady was taken aback for a moment before she cursed, hiding the head and showing the tail, hiding the head and showing the tail. Come out! Unfortunately, these two people also ignored her. Huang Guanzi flew to Taoist Qing Shui's side, looked at her deeply, and then frowned. Master, she actually hurt you. After saying this, he kneeled on the surface of the ocean and bowed deeply. I can't redeem myself even if I die 10,000 times. Taoist Qing Shui waved her hand. Li Chunfeng, this has nothing to do with you. She is your son's friend, not yours. And, she frowned slightly, you look too ugly like this. Change back. Huang Guanzi was stunned and said subconsciously, this skin is not made. But he quickly changed his words and smiled. Yes. I'm disturbing your sight and hearing. After saying this, he stretched out his hand to scratch his own face. Cultivators and demons all had ways to disguise themselves. The demon was originally not a human, so when it transformed into a human, it was actually similar to a person being born from the mother's womb. Whatever the intention was, the appearance would also be the same. For example, when the mud water was not completely dry, it could still be repaired and slightly adjusted. But once the incarnation was completed, the appearance would be fixed. Therefore, if one wanted to transform into another appearance, he would have to use some camouflage. But this method also had a high and low level. The most common trick was used by some traveling Taoist priests and low-level demons. It was to bewitch a person's mind. The appearance of the Taoist priests and demons was still the original appearance. But in the eyes of the bewitched person, it was not the case. When Li Yunxin saw Shanji and the other demons for the first time in the Qiao family's mansion, they used this kind of trick. The more sophisticated trick was to use illusion on oneself. There were a lot of such tricks, and there were more than 100 of them. But since it was an illusion, it naturally couldn't be real. It had to be maintained by demon power and spiritual power. Therefore, it was easy for the aura to leak, and it was easy for others to see through it. Even the most sophisticated of these tricks couldn't escape this limitation. Therefore, if one wanted to hide from the eyes of a great demon like Lord Donghai, they had to use more powerful tricks. The art of painting was one of them. using the condensation of spiritual power and the realm of turning illusions into reality to paint a skin bag. If the trick was exquisite, it could ensure that the spiritual power of the skin bag was restrained and not leaked out. If it was worn on the body, even immortals wouldn't be able to see through it. Because since it was turning illusions into reality, to a certain extent, the skin bag was no different from the real thing. The yellow guanzi skin bag that Li Chunfeng was using now was one of his proudest works. Usually, it could be taken off without any damage, but it still needed to go through various methods. But now that Taoist Qingshui said it looked ugly, he directly tore off the face. Once the face was torn off, it was like the zipper in Li Yunxin's world, with 2 slits from head to toe. The yellow guanzi quickly expanded, and with a soft sound, it turned into spiritual power and disappeared between heaven and earth. Li Chuanfeng's face was revealed. Taoist Qingshui looked at it and smiled. That's more like it. But the smile only appeared on his face for a moment, and he quickly shifted his gaze to Red Lady. Li Chunfeng, now tell me, what should we do with this little demon? If her cultivation level was lower, I could have avoided her or subdued her. But now her cultivation level is very high, and her temper is also very strong. Taoist Qingshui turned to look at Red Lady. I heard that she listened to Li Yunxin and wanted to stop me on the sea. Li Chunfeng slowly stood up and tilted his head, as if he didn't dare to look at Taoist Qingshui directly. Hearing her question, he quickly cupped his hands. Master, please calm down. But why did you come to Donghai? Did I do anything wrong? I came for Xiesheng. Taoist Qingshui interrupted him. Xiesheng is in Li Yunxin's hands. Don't you know? Li Chunfeng sighed and bowed again. It's my fault after all. More than 10 years ago, I couldn't find Xiesheng. It was my first mistake. A few days ago, Li Yunxin just saw him, but he escaped again. That was the second time. Then I went back to Punglai and planned to wait for him to walk into the trap. But I was stopped by Li Yunxin again. That was the third time. Master's troubles were all caused by me. I can't atone for it even if I die 10,000 times. Taoist Qingshui softly said and looked up at Red Lady who was far away. Since this demon couldn't break the inhibition, and her words were ignored, she simply stopped making trouble. After all, Li Yunxin asked her to stop Xiesheng. At this time she had stopped him. Don't blame yourself now. Just tell me what you plan to do. For so many years, Taoist Qingshui said in a low voice, almost all the things in my society are planned by you. After 1,000 years of experience, I can't look down on you anymore. I think you must have a plan for the things on Donghai. Li Yunxin, what are you going to do with him? Li Chunfeng was stunned. Master, didn't you say at the foot of Mount Yunshan that he was still useful? Maybe he could. That was before. Taoist Qingshui blinked. At that time, Xiesheng wasn't in his hands. He may be a variable, and a good one. If we get Xiesheng, we will have the capital to hold those elders hostage. In this case, Li Yunxin can be a way out. But now Xiesheng is in his hands. If he managed to find out anything else, Xiesheng would be useless. At that time, Li Chunfeng opened his mouth. Yes. When Taoist Qingshui and Red Lady were fighting, he didn't talk much. But now he talked a lot when he saw Li Chunfeng, and even his expression became more vivid. What is it? Taoist Qingshui laughed. Tell me. I believe that Li Yunxin is a smart man. Once he asks something, he will know that he will die if he continues to ask. But if he is really stupid, Li Chunfeng sighed. I will kill him myself. Chapter 674. So do you think he got the answer? Li Chunfeng glanced at Red Lady in the distance. I think, not yet. He probably used it as a bait to see you. Taoist Qingshui was silent for a while. You're really brave. Li Chunfeng worshipped again in fear. Master, please don't be angry. It was an expedient measure. At that time, I saw that Li Yunxin had the state of mind of a Taishang and was a terrifying cultivation genius. If we let him go, he would be out of our control very soon. That was the only way. He paused and said carefully, in this world, besides the master's previous life, who else could call him? Taoist Qingshui frowned slightly. Li Chunfeng immediately stopped talking. Undoubtedly, The owner of Southwood House didn't like Li Chunfeng to mention this. As for whether she didn't like to talk about her previous life, or her previous life's role in that incident, no one knew. I believe what you said. Daoist Qingshui was silent for a while and said softly, I didn't come here to see Li Yunxin. I'm just worried about what you've been doing these days. Li Chunfeng. Shen Guanyu is also in East Sea and Penglai. Li Chuanfeng's expression didn't change. I won't affect the overall situation because of her. Li Yunxin and Shen Guanyu are both love tribulations that I'll cut off sooner or later. That's what I'm worried about. Daoist Qingshui let out a sigh. When they were talking, Li Chunfeng was very respectful while Daoist Qingshui looked very calm. But even so, he could feel the pressure between the two of them based on the relationship between superiors and subordinates. But when Daoist Qingshui let out a sigh, the pressure disappeared. It was as if they were two friends chatting. We've known each other for 1,000 years, Daoist Qingshui said. As she spoke, she reached out and slowly rubbed her body. After rubbing a few times, a large piece of scale armor around her shrank back. This action made her look more human, and she indeed looked like an old friend. I know your family is a cultivation genius. You too. Like father, like mother, like son. Li Chunfeng remained silent, his expression unchanged. You cultivated the Tao to the true realm, before changing to the painting Tao. When he was cultivating the painting Tao, he had broken through and regained his youth, which was why he had the appearance of a young man. Many years passed just like that. Priest Qingshui looked at Li Chunfeng carefully. Before you met Shen Guanyu, you cherished your body. But after you met Shen Guanyu, you lived with her for more than 10 years, which meant that you aged yourself by more than 10 years. At that time, I thought that you didn't want Li Yunxin to see through you. But even now you're still like this, Li Chunfeng whispered. If his lord doesn't like it, I'll draw myself back. Clearwater Taoist smiled. It's not a matter of whether I like it or not, or whether you can draw it back. Cultivators say that they have long lives, but aging is not something that they can control. Those who hadn't entered the realm, and couldn't maintain their youth forever would also grow old. Breaking through realm after realm, there would always be a chance to regain their youth. But the extent of youth depends on each person's aptitude and fate. You used to chat with me, and you said that there's no retreat in the path of cultivation. It's appropriate to use it in this case. Breaking through again and regaining their youth. People can choose whether or not they want this youth. But if they don't want this youth and ask themselves to grow old, it's an irreversible process. They have to wait for the next realm before they have a chance to choose. When you and Shen Guanyu raised Li Yunxin, Shen Guanyu chose to call her appearance the same for 10 years. But you said that you're old. You're already in the mysterious realm. You should know that once you grow old, you'll never have the chance to regain your youth. Priest Qingshui was silent for a while. Are you doing this for Shen Guanyu, Li Yunxin, or your tribulation of love? No matter which one it is, I don't believe that you'll cut it off. Priest Qingshui whispered, She mysterious realm. You've stayed for 1,000 years. You've never cut off your love. Can you do it this time? Li Chunfeng was finally moved. He moved his feet and said, You're very similar to that female monster. Priest Qingshui looked at him and said, You didn't realize that your problem is not only the tribulation of love. The tribulation of love has now become a part of your other tribulation. You don't cut it off because you need this tribulation of love. You need to feel that you still have feelings, that you can be touched, and that you're like an ordinary person. But are you touched by Shen Guanyu or Li Yunxin? You don't know it yourself, do you? You're holding on to this obsession, this tribulation of love, for fear that you'll lose it. Li Chunfeng, don't you realize that you've entered the void tribulation? Li Chunfeng slightly opened his eyes and said, Master, you're overthinking. Priest Qingshui raised a hand and sealed Li Chuanfeng's lips with a finger, saying softly, You're in the mountain. I know what you're going to do to Shen Guanyu. She's with Lord Donghai. Ordinary people who know the inside story will think that you're a married couple, playing the Dragon King of Donghai in the palm of your hand. But those who know something about you will think that Shen Guanyu is also your chess piece. But this time she doesn't know it. But I understand you. Priest Qingshui moved closer and looked into Li Chuanfeng's eyes, saying slowly, "You really fell in love with her, and you really eloped with her. But the regret in your heart made you unable to face her anymore, so you left. Until now, you want to choose a husband for her, who can love her and take care of her. Unfortunately, in this aspect, your vision is as bad as hers. In fact, it's already bad that you chose her. A girl like her, born in the Xianmen, has extraordinary talent, and is doted on by millions. Such a girl is like a proud daughter of an official's family in the secular world." She told a thief who jumped into her boudoir that she was depressed and had no one to rely on. But the thief took it seriously, and so did the girl. But she didn't know that a girl like her, even after hundreds or thousands of years, would still be a girl. She only thinks about love, and she can be called kind. But she doesn't have the responsibility to show off her kindness. She doesn't want to be responsible for anything, and never knows what she should be responsible for. Luckily, she's a cultivator, and can save her life. If she's a lady in the secular world, she probably only knows how to cry. Priest Qingshui smiled. This isn't her fault, it's her family background's fault. She's even better than many ladies of her family background. But Li Chunfeng, you think you're doing it for her own good, to atone for her sins, to choose someone for her that you think is worth entrusting. But have you asked her? You are doing it for your own good. Until now, haven't you realized it? When you're in the tribulation of love, your love can't be real. It's not that you want to love, it's that tribulation that wants you to love. You think your own feelings and thoughts are actually the thoughts of the tribulation of love. And the thoughts that you want to cling to this tribulation of love is not yours. It's the thoughts of your vacuum tribulation. Do you understand now? Li Chunfeng gritted his teeth and took a step back, widening the distance between him and Priest Qingshui. Then he frowned. My lord. My lord, what are you trying to do by saying all this at this time and place? I told you not to spoil things because of your own good intentions. Priest Qingshui rubbed the space between her eyebrows. At this moment, the strange phenomenon on her body had disappeared, and the thin gauze dress had returned. If you could have taken action against Li Yunqin earlier and gotten Xiesheng, why would I come to the East Sea to help you? Xiesheng is in Li Yunqin's hands now. It's troublesome for you and me to get something out of his hands. So now that there's someone to do it for you, I hope you can control yourself. Li Chunfeng said in a low voice. My lord, are you referring to the remaining Dragon King of the 8 Seas? Priest Qingshui didn't say anything and only looked at him. She seemed to be dissatisfied with his reaction. Li Chunfeng said again. My lord, are you saying to get the Dragon King of the 8 Seas to attack Li Yunqin and let him die in their hands? Priest Qingshui still didn't say anything. That's my original plan, but because my lord said that Li Yunqin is still useful, I decided to wait for him to get rid of the Dragon King before taking him down. Li Chunfeng frowned and said, My lord just said that if Li Yunqin didn't get what Xiesheng knows. It was just now. Priest Qingshui finally spoke. Usually, you wouldn't ask so many questions. You would say, well, this is called mutual destruction. Li Yunqin is useful, but after he used Xiesheng to threaten us, he became a huge threat. We're exposed to him. He doesn't belong to Mu Nanju, nor the Freemasonry, but he knows too much. I've given him many chances in the past, but he's disappointed me. Now he's restless and wants to take the initiative. But I can tolerate all of that. But your reaction just now and your excuse for him made me realize how dangerous he really is. Li Chunfeng, Priest Qingshui said seriously, for the sake of our friendship of 1,000 years, I don't want you to kill him yourself. But from now on, Mu Nanju won't give him any help. You don't interfere anymore, and just stay by Donghai King's side. As for the rest, if he dies, you can collect his body. You can also cut off your relationship. If he doesn't die, I'll deal with it. But Li Chunfeng hesitated for a while. It's hard for him to. And that female demon. Priest Qingshui looked at Red Lady. The latter seemed to be trying to hear what they were talking about. But Priest Qingshui's restriction was unusual, so she couldn't get what she wanted. We've come this far. We've disintegrated the Freemasonry, Xianmen and demons, and we're close to the netherworld. She retracted her gaze. And the elders on Mount Yunshan, have almost given up their power in the secular world. This means they might have to do that. If we're late, everyone will die. Chapter 675. Taoist Qingshui sighed. I know you've seen a lot of hypocrisy wrapped in the so-called justice and truth. But what we're doing now is indeed a great thing. No matter how dark the process is. She looked at him. After a while she said, Li Chunfeng, can I still trust you like before? The man heaved a deep sigh. I've never changed. Then I won't go. I'll wait for you in Baishui town. Taoist Qingshui said, I've mobilized the forces of the eastern countries. Once the Donghai incident is over and you're held back, I'll support you. She sighed again. The land isn't peaceful either. Hearing this, Li Chunfeng was slightly moved. It's that. Lu Gongzan. Taoist Qingshui said. But he just happened to be there. You've been in the Donghai these days, so you don't know what's happening on the land. It's a mess. It seemed that because of Li Chunfeng's promise to her, her expression softened again. So when they talked, it was like a casual conversation between friends. You should know these things. I'll send the news to you later, but I'll tell you first. You'll be prepared at sea. Taoist Qingshui thought for a while. After you know Yunshan, some people from the Xianmen are still alive. Some of them live in seclusion. Others go to the secular world and say they want to start a new sect. But the Freemasonry also occupy many caves and blessed lands. Both of them say they're the orthodox. When they fight, they can't care about anything else. Then Emperor Li says he wants to build a ghost kingdom. The one in the Qing kingdom also becomes a ghost emperor and wants to build a ghost kingdom. The two are fighting again, and now it's affecting several countries in the west. Li Chunfeng frowned. The cultivation of the one in the Qing kingdom isn't high, but Emperor Li is at the peak of the Xian realm. How? Because Emperor Li is also hurt. Taoist Qingshui looked to the east. Your son did a good thing. Guqin hurt him. Now Emperor Li is fighting with the one in the Qing kingdom and Guqin. The one in the Qing kingdom? Li Chunfeng thought for a while. Is he the one we should help? Taoist Qingshui shook her head. I once told him to live well, but he had become a ghost. A good-for-nothing. Then, the fate of the Qing kingdom had come to an end. The era of great competition was coming. He wanted to call him the overlord of the Midland. But since they wanted to fight with Emperor Li, then let them fight. We can look in the direction of the state of you. I heard that Ng Juren is a promising talent. Since Li Yunxin has spent so much effort on him, and he has our people by his side, then his efforts will not be in vain. It's just that we hoped for the world to be in chaos, but we didn't expect it to be this chaotic. Taoist Qingshui looked at Li Chunfeng. When a few ghost emperors fight, the repercussions are everywhere. Some of the demons were emboldened, and they gradually began to occupy the city and claim themselves as kings, eating from the city. However, this scene is also within our expectations. He had originally thought that since the remaining members of the Celestial Sect of Wonders and the Freemasons that had been left behind, they would definitely not sit idly by and do nothing. In the end, guess what? That Lu Gongzan went to find trouble with the Celestial Sect of Wonders. He said that he wanted to avenge Shirquizi. Only these people were left in the Celestial Sect of Wonders, and now they can be considered to be on the same side. He poked a hornet's nest. First he was defeated and injured. After recuperating, he learned from Li Yunxin's style, and went to guerrilla warfare. What he got was hatred's body. How could the Celestial Sect of Wonders stop him? There were heavy casualties, and they had no time to care about those demons. That's why this mess happened. Taoist Qingshui paused here. Lu Gongzan has become a bad variable. I originally wanted to get rid of him, but then I thought that maybe I can keep him to hold back Li Yunxin. These days, I have already sent people to capture him. Now he is trapped in the north. In about 10 more days, whether he is captured or killed, there should be a result. At that time, you can use him here. Li Chunfeng thought for a while, and only said, Master, you are far-sighted. Taoist Qingshui nodded. Get the Dragon Island, get the entrance to the Netherworld. If there is a new world in the Netherworld, it will be mine and yours. Go. After she said this, the small boat under her feet suddenly retreated. She only retreated about 10 feet, but in an instant, She was 100 miles away. After a breath's time, she could no longer be seen. Since Daoist Qingshui left, the restriction on the sea disappeared. Red Madam immediately frowned. She thought that there would be a fierce battle between the two of them. She didn't expect that Daoist Qingshui came and left suddenly. Only a Xian realm man was left. She was about to speak, but Li Chunfeng turned to her. I persuaded her to leave. Help me pass a message to Li Yunqin. Who are you? Shangguan Yu is in Penglai Island. She is now kept in the water-repelling essence light shield by the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea. Li Chunfeng interrupted her. She still doesn't know what I have done. If he wants to ask me, find me, and save Shangguan Yu, he must calm the sea. Now that Penglai is surrounded by a large number of soldiers, he can't break in. Now the vast army is going to send troops again. You go and tell him that the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. After saying this, Li Chunfeng rode the wind and was about to go northeast. But Red Madam waved her hand, and suddenly a wall of water rose from the sea. I can't stop her, but can't I stop you? Stop pretending to be a ghost. Because of the previous setbacks, the female monster wanted to use all her strength. Li Chunfeng was really stopped by her. But he didn't panic, just looked at her. Li Yunqin asked you to stop the owner of Southernwood House. But did he ask you to stop me? Instead of entangling with me here, it's better to help him. In a couple of hours, the Eastern Sea Army will be here. At that time, even if I pretend to stop you, it will be a waste of time. Red Madam sneered. You are obviously on her side. Li Chunfeng was stunned, as if he just realized something. Then he smiled and pointed to himself. So little girl, you don't know who I am? Red Madam glared at him. I don't care who you are. I am his father, Li Chunfeng. Li Chunfeng said. I heard that your Dongting always likes secular prosperity, and your father likes to make friends in the human world. Since you want to be my daughter-in-law, why don't you bow to me? Bullshit, Red Madam said angrily. His parents died a long time ago. Although she said so, she still frowned and stared at Li Chunfeng. A look of doubt soon appeared on her face. If Li Yunqin was 20 or 30 years older, it seemed that he should be like this. Seeing that she was in a daze, Li Chunfeng flew up again and said, Go! Red Madam raised her hand, but she didn't stop him. Hundreds of miles away from the stone pillar where Li Yunqin lived, as Li Chunfeng said, the vast army was mobilizing troops. They spent a whole day watching Li Yunqin's movements, and finally realized that it was difficult to find any clues. There were only two things Li Yunqin did. One was to repair the magic circle, and the other was to draw soldiers one after another. These monsters in the sea had never seen such a method before. The so-called magic of turning beans into soldiers in Xianmen could not only be used by cultivators, but also by some monsters. But they all knew that it was an expedient measure in an emergency. After all, those things were transformed by Wacken and monster power. Some of the Wacken and monster power came from heaven and earth, and the other part came from the caster. Once it was damaged, the caster would also suffer. It was not something that could be transformed and thrown out. Therefore, it was often used to do some troublesome things that were inconvenient for the caster to do. It was a means of using the strong to fight the weak. If two strong people used this method in a fight, if the opponent broke these things one by one, it was equal to hurting the original person, which was exactly what the enemy wanted. But the method Li Yunqin was using now looked completely different. He was in the profound realm, and now he was using the skill of turning illusions into reality to draw them one by one. They were all strange-looking guys. For example, there was a green-armored swordsman holding a two-handed great sword. He wore a helmet on his head, but there were so many eyes on it that it was scary to look at. He sat cross-legged next to Li Yunqin, as if he was protecting him. There was another swordsman with his hair tied up, holding a long and thin sword. The sword was sheathed at his waist, and he was leaning against a deep blue ox demon, who was playing an unknown musical instrument. The sound was curling up, like the mournful music of ancient times. There seemed to be a stone demon next to the ox demon. There was a faint flame coming out of the cracks on its body. It was as if lava had become a spirit. There was also a snake demon with a head full of snake hair, a nine-tailed fox demon, and other strange dressed guys. They were standing on the reef where Li Yunqin was, and there were more than 40 of them. At first he thought that they were help from somewhere, but he soon found something unusual. For example, when he summoned something, if he didn't like it, he would draw something on the paper in his hand. That thing would disappear into thin air. Seeing this, he realized that he had summoned it with his own ability. But even Qin Fengzi could feel that those things were real. They weren't created by pure demonic power or spiritual power. And they did exist in this world. Although there were strong and weak powers, they did exist. These demons seemed to be the commanders who led the army. Under the stone pillar, on the surface of the sea that Li Yunqin had solidified with his ability, there were thousands of soldiers. These soldiers were all dressed in different attires, and their weapons were of all sorts. Some had their hair in a bun, some wore heavy armor, and some held sabers as tall as a person. Lord Haohan used his ability to eavesdrop, and he could even hear the soldiers talking among themselves, saying things like Great Qin Star-destroying crossbow, Great Song electromagnetic cannon, Great Tang battleship cutting saber, etc. The names were shocking, and they indeed shocked him. What was Li Yunqin trying to do? He hurriedly asked Qin Fengzi, but Qin Fengzi also frowned. These soldiers, although their words were evil, just by looking at their armor, they were just ordinary soldiers. Could they withstand the attack of the vast army of demon soldiers? Chapter 676. But how could he not panic as he watched him create soldiers one by one? But even if he panicked, he had to wait for a day. Someone had already killed his way to the center of the army. He said that because he cherished talent, the whole army had retreated and asked him to rest. If he went back on his word, the demon kings on the ocean would become restless, and it would be a great disaster for him in the future. Finally, a whole day had passed. He heard the report from the 15 scouts heading to the northeast. Lord Donghai's army had already set off, and it was said that two powerful beings were fighting to the west, closer to the land. One of the two powerful beings must be the female demon Red Lady. He knew that the opportunity had finally come. He should take this opportunity to charge with the whole army and end the battle as soon as possible. He couldn't give Li Yunqin any time to prepare. So Lord Haohan, who had been sitting on the throne for a whole day, slowly stood up. His face was gloomy, and there was a bit of pity on it. He took 3 steps forward and said in a deep voice, "All troops move forward." The soldiers under his command didn't feel sorry for him. In their eyes, Li Yunqin had killed countless comrades, and now he had recruited many soldiers. In their hearts they only thought, how good it would have been if I had killed him earlier. This time, Lord Haohan planned to charge with the whole army and finish the battle in one fell swoop. He had already lost face once, and if he made another mistake, his reputation wouldn't be good for hundreds of years. But as the saying goes, good things are strewn with setbacks. When the army reached the front of Li Yunqin's army and was about to carefully spread out the formation, scouts came to report that 3 more troops were coming from the direction of Penglai. They were North Sea Dragon King, Chuliao Dragon King, and Sichuan Dragon King. Lord Haohan was stunned and ordered the troops to stop and wait for orders. But the demon generals under him had already started cursing. The purpose of the 3 troops was clear. At first, no one was willing to take the lead because they didn't know the actual strength of Li Yunqin. Now Lord Haohan's army had found out some of his strength. He was very strong, amazingly strong. But it wasn't enough to deal with the well-organized army that was swarming forward. That was why he sent his troops over. Perhaps they were shouting, "We heard that Lord Vast Expanse's troops didn't go well, so we specially came to help." But in their hearts, they were definitely thinking of quickly sharing some of the credit, or rather, not letting Lord Vast Expanse even have the chance to save his face. Lord Vast Expanse's expression was very ugly, but he did not show his anger in front of his generals. They could only wait for about 4 hours before the 3 armies arrived. The 3 Dragon King and his subordinates were invited to the center of the vast army. The throne of the carriage became spacious and became like a balcony. The 4 of them seemed to be led by Lord Boundless, but in reality, they were discussing matters together. When the Dragon King of North Sea was in the palace on Penglai Island, he saw an old white-haired old man. But now that he was leading an army and had changed into his military uniform, he looked like an old general who had been on the battlefield for a long time. After sitting down with Chu Liao Dragon King and Chi Chuan Dragon King, he first cupped his hands and laughed. "Aya, we came uninvited. Lord Vast Expanse will be angry. Haha, he will be angry." As he spoke, he looked at the other two. Originally, when Lord Vast Expanse sent his troops, of course it would be successful. But us brothers, listen to the movements say. Don't waste your breath. Lord Vast Expanse's face was gloomy as he interrupted the old dragon. The three of you, each brought 1,000 troops to me. Do you think I don't know what you want to do? The Dragon King of North Sea hurriedly said. Not at all. We came in a hurry. Our troops are still on the way. We are no closer to the Eastern Sea than Lord Vast Expanse. But at this time, Lord Vast Expanse did not seem to want to give these people any face. He laughed coldly and continued his previous words. Divide the credit. My vast army first investigated Li Yunxin's situation. Then you brought people over. If we really fought, I would still be the main force. If we won, you would end up with the reputation of the Allied army. I'm rather puzzled. Who do you want to show this reputation to? The Dragon King of North Sea laughed again. Lord Vast Expanse's words are incorrect. While the 4 Dragon Kings were engaged in a verbal battle, the disciples of the lifeless immortal gate in their army had also gathered together. Different from the vast army, the cultivators of the lifeless immortal gate in the remaining 7 navies had a very high status. In front of Lord Vast Expanse, Qin Fengzi was like someone being ordered around. But in the army, the cultivators and necromancers of the remaining 7 navies were more like staff officers or military counselors. The commander of the necromancers in each army was the staff officer of the Dragon King, or a high-ranking general, while the other necromancers under him were the staff officers of the next rank. Now that they were gathered together, although the atmosphere was much more harmonious than between the 4 Dragon Kings, it was still very subtle. Because of the sects, cultivators gathered with other cultivators, and necromancers gathered with other necromancers. Qin Fengzi and the commanders of the necromancers of the other 3 armies were all outside the vast army, and they had set up formations around them, so that the conversation between the 4 of them wouldn't be heard by others in the army. The 3 of them looked at Qin Fengzi, setting up the formation with a strange expression. After he finished setting up the formation, one of them said, Don't you think this is a good idea? When Qin Fengzi was setting up the formation, the sentries near the army were watching. There were also other soldiers who saw it, pointing and whispering from afar. He was doing this in front of these demon soldiers and demon generals, so it was obvious that he was being cautious. It was fine if he was facing outsiders, but facing people in the same army, he was being too distant. But Qin Fengzi didn't mind and smiled. There's nothing bad about it. My place is no better than yours. The Dragon King of the vast expanse has always disliked us people from the Immortal Gate. It's fine that I can help him set up the formation. Those cultivators from the same sect are practically used by him as ordinary soldiers. Once they make a mistake, the punishment is even heavier. It can't be compared to your celestial days. The 3 necromancers exchanged glances, and one of them sighed. Elder Ancestor said that you are the most talented. In the end, you were sent here by such a crude person. It's a waste of your talent. Qin Fengzi smiled again. But I have more freedom. For example, I don't need to worry about the surface when doing these things. I know that they are guarding against me, and they also know that I am guarding against them. We can be considered to understand each other. Let's talk about these things later. Why are the 3 of you here? Is it because of the soul-seizing formation? The necromancer who spoke earlier replied, Yes. A day ago, Qin Fengzi tried to communicate with Li Yunxin before the battle, and sold half of Lord Vast Expanse's secrets. He told them what kind of formation the 3 armies were using, and about the soul-seizing formation under the sea. Actually, this so-called soul-seizing formation wasn't really a secret. The 9 armies of the Dragon King and the sea all had this formation, with the necromancers of the lifeless immortal sect setting up the formation, guiding and practicing. It finally became something like a standard. In the words of Li Yunxin's world, it should be classified as a strategic weapon and tool in the army. The mortal armies on land couldn't help but suffer casualties in battle. The dead soldiers not only reduced the fighting power of the army, they would also become a burden. Collecting and burying the corpses required manpower. And because the demon armies on the sea were all demons in human form, the souls of their dead were also a very valuable asset. The soul-seizing formation in the army was a formation that used this asset to collect the muddle-headed remnant souls into the formation, and then refine them into demonic energy. Then it could be used to support the soldiers who were still alive, or as a means of attack. This kind of method was very difficult to implement on land, because humans always valued human relations and etiquette more than demons. If they really did this, not to mention the effectiveness of the formation, the morale of the people would definitely fall apart. Mortals paid particular attention to burial, and death was the most important thing. But if their souls were scattered after death, who would fight for them? But such a soul-seizing formation would have a very serious loss. For example, if a newly dead remnant soul contained 10% demonic energy, then after the soul-seizing formation circulation, only 30% could be used. The remaining 70% would be consumed in the circulation process. The formation was like a machine. It also needed to be replenished with energy. However, this was what the necromancers of the lifeless immortal sect said. The one who talked the most with Qin Fengzi was the head of the necromancers of the North Sea Army, San Fengzi. He answered with a yes, and his face became serious. We are not here to snatch your credit, senior marshal brother. There is a reason for this. It happened not long ago. He lowered his voice. There was news from the immortal sect. They said that they needed more souls. We thought about it, and felt that it was about the formation in the vast sea. Senior marshal brother, did you hear anything? Qin Fengzi was slightly stunned. That formation? That formation has been in the vast sea for many years. All these years, the demons in the 9 seas have been fighting and killing. All the newly born remnant souls have been refined, and 70% of them have been refined into that formation. As for the demonic power inside, we don't even dare to imagine it. Why are they in such a hurry to get more souls now? San Fengzi hesitated slightly. They probably saw this opportunity when the 9 seas sent out their troops, and thought that it was a good opportunity. We gave the Dragon King and the others 10% of the demonic power in the soul-seizing formation, and gave them 30%. The remaining 70% is said to be consumed, but it is actually flowing to the formation in the vast sea. Recently, many demons have died in the sea. The demonic power is also considerable. Qin Fengzi frowned. I'm afraid. Elder Ancestor saw what happened at Lu Yunshan's place a few days ago. When he saw tens of thousands of Lu Yao dying, he was also tempted. But the sea is different from the land. The demons on the land were sent to their deaths by the dragon sun on the land. Although we are from the immortal sect, we are all sea demons. If you really ask us to do those things on the land, to kill our own kind, to cut off their roots, can you do it? These 2 people's words were very vague, but the 4 of them were very clear in their hearts. In the vast sea, there was a formation. Only the disciples of the immortal sect, the core disciples of the immortal sect, knew about the existence of this formation. The necromancers of the immortal sect provided the soul-seizing formation to the Dragon King's army of the 9 seas. It was said that the souls of the dead demons were refined into 30% demonic power for the demon army to use, but in fact, the soldiers of the Dragon King only got a small portion. The big head, the remaining 70% of the demonic energy, was gathered in the hidden grand formation in the vast sea. Until now, San Fengzi smiled bitterly. Senior marshal brother, you think too much. You are saying that Elder Ancestor wants to be like the dragon sun on the land, to send the demon army of the 9 seas to their deaths, and use their souls? Ha! Even if Elder Ancestor wants to do this, the demons on the land died in the hands of the cultivators of the Taoist sect. Who will be the enemy on the sea? Speaking up to this point, he looked to the west and said, Can it be that Li Yunxin? I think he will die here today. We are afraid that he will die too quickly. After knowing that your vast sea army was defeated, the few of us hurriedly urged the Dragon King to rush over. We thought that if the few of them could restrain each other, that would give that Li Yunxin more time to breathe and kill more demons in the future battle. We can be considered to have done our part for Elder Ancestor. Speaking up to this point, he noticed that Qin Fengzi's expression suddenly changed, and he was stunned. San Fengzi frowned. Senior Marshal Brother, what's wrong? But Qin Fengzi was stunned for a full 3 breaths before he blinked his eyes. Did we misunderstand Elder Ancestor's intention? Seeing his expression, the 3 of them were even more shocked. Although this Qin Fengzi had only cultivated for a short period of time, and his cultivation level was low, he was very talented and was favored by that Elder Ancestor. Usually, he was very calm when he did things, but now he was inexplicably shocked, as if he thought of something big. Misunderstood? San Fengzi said. What meaning? That's Li Yunxin. Qin Fengzi widened his eyes and looked towards the west. After looking for a long time, he said, That's right. Why didn't I think of it earlier? Junior Marshal Brother, how did Taoist Master Purple Knight lose to Li Yunxin? You all know the details, right? San Fengzi was still frowning. Those cultivators have their eyes on the top of their heads. It's not strange for them to lose because they underestimated their enemies. That's not what I'm talking about. When Taoist Master Purple Knight attacked Li Yunxin's restriction, he said that Li Yunxin couldn't hold on, and shouted to borrow a spell from the Shinryu. And it seems like he really did borrow it, which was why he was able to resist that attack. Qin Fengzi frowned as he spoke. Think about it. These Dragon Kings came to encircle Li Yunxin because they believed that Shinryu only wanted to use Li Yunxin as a training ground for the Dragon Kings on the sea. If that's the case, why would Shinryu lend him a technique, and why would he dare to lend it to him? I'm afraid that the Dragon King's worries are true. Li Yunxin really received a promise from the Shinryu. Yes, Qin Fengzi said. Think about it. Although our old ancestor and the Shinryu did not have any contact, but we all know that there must be some kind of agreement in order for us to live in peace. When that Taoist Master Zai went to attack Li Yunxin, I heard that his words were also very polite. He is one of the people who understands the old ancestors' intentions the most. The Celestial Gate also said that they wanted Li Yunxin's treasures and scriptures. But if they really wanted it, the Celestial Gate has countless experts. Wouldn't it be more convenient for them to do things than these Dragon Kings who obstruct each other? Once all the experts come out, Li Yunxin would have died dozens of times already. How could he still be alive today? San Fengzi and the other 2 necromancers were stunned at first, then they frowned. You mean? I'm afraid that what we should do isn't to kill Li Yunxin. Qin Fengzi stared at the west, his expression changed dramatically. We should help him secretly. That was close. We almost guessed the old ancestors' intentions wrongly. Chapter 677. They didn't expect him to say something like that. The 3 necromancers were silent for a while before saying hesitantly, If that's the case, why didn't he tell us directly? Senior Marshal Brother, are you thinking too much? Is there something else? In my opinion, he's just afraid that there will be too many people talking. Qin Fengzi looked at the 3 of them. Only people like the Purple Knight and Lighten might be able to get the news. As for us, we can only guess. Or maybe he thinks that we aren't capable enough. Even if we do things casually, we won't be able to affect the overall situation. San Fengzi wasn't convinced by his words. Can't we? Senior Marshal Brother. The 4 of us managed to convince the Dragon King of the 4 Seas to attack Li Yunxin immediately. Isn't that enough to change the overall situation? Qin Fengzi smiled. Junior Marshal Brother, why didn't the Dragon King make a move a day ago? And why didn't the rest of the Dragon Kings attack together? Was it really because of our persuasion? They aren't stupid. Even you, me, and the 4 of us. If we were in the position of the 4 Dragon Kings, we wouldn't be able to do anything. Seeing how this Li Yunxin arrogantly went to the surface of the ocean to challenge the Dragon Kings, and how he has connections with all the factions, and how he always does unexpected things, do we really dare to not think about anything and just charge forward like that? San Fengzi opened his mouth, as if he wasn't convinced. But he wasn't a willful person after all. After a while he said unwillingly, "Senior Marshal Brother's words make sense. Li Yunxin isn't stupid, and he doesn't look like he wants to die. Now that he plans to challenge the Nine Seas army by himself, it's indeed suspicious. We aren't afraid of him, but what else he has behind his back? The Dragon Kings are worried about this. That's why they are hesitating. He isn't someone we can persuade. But Senior Marshal Brother," he frowned and spread his hands. "Then what should we do? The current situation is like mud, and it's hard to raise one's spirits." Qin Fengzi shook his head and sighed. "That's why I said that although our words carry some weight in the army, but in the grand scheme of things I'm afraid it's nothing." At this point he suddenly paused, as if he was lost in thought. After pausing for 2 or 3 breaths, he turned to look at the 3 people in front of him, a complicated expression on his face. "We have guessed half right," he said solemnly. "The seal of the ancestors." The 3 necromancers widened their eyes, and their words were filled with surprise and envy. Seal books. The so-called book printing was a sacred art of the lifeless immortal sect. Those with high cultivation bases could directly imprint the information into someone's divine sense. Although it could only transmit a few short sentences, it was fast. Although the 3 of them were the leaders of the necromancers in the Dragon King's army, they could count the number of times they had seen the ancestor in person. Now that they knew that Qin Fengzi had obtained news of that person, they knew that their senior martial brother had a lot of weight in their ancestor's heart. After receiving the ancestor's decree, you should take a bath and burn incense. But this is an emergency. Qin Fengzi glanced at the vast army and said, "We shouldn't attract too much attention. Junior brothers, please listen carefully." Our ancestor said, "The vast sea god seizing array will be opened in the month. Do everything possible to stabilize the 9 Seas Navy in the East Sea. No mistakes." As he spoke, the 4 of them looked solemn, and their bodies were extremely straight. After saying this, they relaxed a little. After a moment of silence, Qin Fengzi said in a low voice, "The world is going to change." The other 3 did not speak, and their expressions were extremely complicated. At this moment, they realized that Qin Fengzi had guessed half right. The existence of Li Yunxin was useful to their ancestor. But this usefulness was not the result of their conspiracy, nor did it seem to be a deliberate cooperation. It was more like a coincidence that they had caught up to a certain point. The existence of a god-seizing array in the vast sea was known to the few necromancers. In fact, there were not many people in the 9 Seas who knew about this. There should be at least a dozen of them. They did not know when this god-seizing array was set up, but it must have existed for longer than the 9 Dragon Kings' existence. That array was so big that half of the vast sea was in it, which made it extremely difficult to be discovered. The god-seizing array used by the 9 Seas Navy was a child array of the god-seizing array. It continuously transferred 70% of the demon power of the dead demons in the sea. In Qin Fengzi's words, it had already accumulated an unknown amount of power. So his previous deduction was not wrong. That ancestor did not care much about the demon power of the demon army. What he cared more about was gathering the 9 Dragon King soldiers in the East Sea, so that their rear would be empty. As for what to do after that, it would depend on what the god-seizing array was. The 4 of them knew clearly what this meant. Right now, they were like a small fish drifting in the waves. They just knew that they were about to capsize, but they did not know what was outside the waves. Besides being surprised, they also panicked. If things changed, what should they do in the 9 Seas Navy? Li Yunxin's arrival should be a coincidence. It should be like this, right? Therefore, the old ancestor also wanted to use him as a part of his plan. Qin Fengzi thought of this and couldn't help but say, "A strong person like him." The 3 necromancers beside him knew what he meant. Li Yunxin was the Dragon King of the continent, and he had the cultivation of Shi mystical realm. But speaking of strength, he might have already surpassed the advanced mystical realm. This person's strength was witnessed by many people in the ocean these days. But even such a strong person seemed to be the same as these small fish, swept into the big waves and didn't know it. This Li Yunxin really didn't know? Was it possible that, while they thought that he was just a part of the plan, he also thought the same? But this thought was too bold and rebellious. Qin Fengzi quickly suppressed this thought. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard a low shout. This shout came from the west. It was undoubtedly Li Yunqin's voice. "I say." The voice sounded lazy and a little impatient. "Are you going to fight or not?" When the necromancers heard this, the 4 dragon kings also heard it. Right now, they were about 100 miles away from the stone pillar, where Li Yunqin was hiding. With their cultivation, they could clearly see what Li Yunqin was doing. He was no longer using a special method to summon those soldiers. Right now, there were about 40 to 50 people on the stone pillar, and 2,000 to 3,000 people on the sea below the pillar. Densely packed together, they could be counted as an army. But Lord Boundless, who had fought with him before, knew that this wasn't his full strength. He could still release thousands of ferocious beasts. Although those ferocious beasts couldn't be used in battle, they had to be guarded against. This guy is really strange and evil. Just give him a day, and he has created an army. His shout was clearly a show of force. If the dragon kings could hear it, the demons on the sea naturally could as well. They immediately became noisy again. It was clearly a huge battle, but now it was being made into some sort of grand event. After fighting for a day, they rested for a day. More and more demon kings came from all directions. Now that they had been idle for a day, they were so bored that smoke was coming out of their heads. The newcomers could not wait to see the legendary feat of Li Yunqin charging into the enemy's formation alone again. Unfortunately, the vast army dilly-dallied and didn't send any troops. Now that they heard the Dragon King from the continent challenge them, they were overjoyed. Lord Boundless stood up and looked at the stone pillar. Li Yunqin was sitting on the side of the stone pillar, his legs dangling down. He was holding a blue notebook and a pen in his hand. This kind of behavior was rare in this world, but it wasn't rare in his previous world. If he was wearing a white coat, he would look like an old-school researcher observing his experiment subjects and planning to take notes. But a day ago, his heart was like dead ashes, and he only wanted to die. But now he had become so bored and impatient, it was very strange. But Lord Boundless had dealt with him a few times. He already knew that he couldn't use common sense to judge this guy. He used to hear that he was eccentric, but now he knew that he really lived up to his reputation. That North Sea Dragon King also frowned and squinted, staring at Li Yunqin for a while. "What does he mean?" Lord Boundless sneered. "What does he mean? He saw the 3 of you coming to disturb me, so he knew that I wouldn't send troops for a while. So he challenged me to lower my spirit and let those restless ones around me cause a bit of a ruckus. It's just a bluff." "Humph. So he was just putting on an act when he came to my army. To think that I thought he was a real hero." Saying this, he waved his hand impatiently. "Just wait and see. The longer you and I are entangled here, the more he wants." North Sea Dragon King heard him say this, and breathed a sigh of relief. He leaned back on the chair again, assuming the posture of an old man. "If that's the case, then what else is there to?" But he heard Li Yunqin shout again. Just like last time, he used his supernatural power, so that everyone on the ocean could hear. "If you don't attack, I will." Lord Boundless snorted again, and sat back on the throne. But then he stood up like a spring. He saw Li Yunqin wave his hand. The thousands of soldiers he had stationed on the surface of the ocean had actually swarmed over to kill him. The 4 Dragon Kings looked at each other. What the hell is he doing now? The 3,000 soldiers that Li Yunqin had placed at the forefront all looked like they were carved from the same mold. When he was drawing, he was lazy. He only carefully drew one, dipped the brush in ink, and threw the rest into the air, as if Nuwa had created humans. This group of soldiers held big sabers, which shone under the sun, as if each of them was holding a mirror. The officer next to Lord Boundless had never seen such a formation, but he was nervous, so he plucked up the courage to ask Li Yunqin who these people were, so that he would not be so nervous. Li Yunqin, who had sat on the rock for a whole night, no longer looked dejected like yesterday. He looked energetic and full of fighting spirit. Perhaps he had thought it through, or perhaps he had used some method to suppress some of his feelings somewhere in his heart. So he actually replied to him. He said a bunch of strange words half seriously and half jokingly, which the officer naturally did not understand. Perhaps in his previous world, not everyone could understand it. In fact, it was related to what happened in his previous life. After he decided to take revenge in his previous life, he wholeheartedly devoted himself to this matter, which could give him a sense of belonging in this world. With his character, of course, he had to think everything through. How to get close to that person, how to catch that person, were not the details. The real details were to plan when, and what kind of torture tools to use, which could make people feel the most intense pain and fear. After thinking of many ways, he finally decided to use knives. So he investigated and studied. First, he came into contact with a group of cold weapon enthusiasts, and then he came into contact with more weapon enthusiasts. With his character, he was too lazy to talk to those people, just like how people were too lazy to argue with cats and dogs. But for some strange reason, he also realized that arguing and quarreling with others could actually stir up some of his emotions and cause a strange ripple in his heart. So he slowly regarded it as an interesting change in his life. After a while, he found that some people, who were no different from cats and dogs in his eyes, actually knew more about some things than he did, which was also a wonderful thing for him. It was like finding a novel pattern on a huge piece of white paper, which could kill a lot of time. It was also at that time that he realized that he had such a strong curiosity and desire for knowledge. It turned out that there were more interesting people in this world than he had expected. He thought that he was smarter than others, but in fact there were some not-so-smart people who could make him sigh at their inferiority after being in the same place for a long time. Because of this, he got to know one or two people. But what happened to them after that was a different story. In short, he learned some things at that time. For example, some people praised the broadsword of the Tang dynasty, some felt that the crossbow of the Qin dynasty was powerful, and some said that the huge crossbow of the Song dynasty was comparable to the gunpowder weapons of the later generations. These kinds of views were pursued by many people, and of course, there were also people who opposed them. So they said things like Tang battleship cutting sword, Qin star destroying crossbow, Song electromagnetic cannon, and so on. When he came to this world, he would sometimes think about the things that happened back then, and he would feel that those boring and unbearable days in his previous life, when he thought about it now, could actually be considered interesting in a certain sense. So he made these things first. But at this moment, it wasn't just for fun, it was for serious. To do experiments. He felt that he was about to understand some things. If the evil king of the Pitfall Mountain and the 7 sons of the evil king were the projections of characters he knew in his original world, and were drawn into this world, then what about other things? It was true that the cultivators and demons of this world possessed terrifying power. But in his original world, there were some terrifying powers that even the cultivators and demons couldn't imagine. With the cultivation of the art saint, why didn't he create those things? Since he didn't, was there some kind of restriction? He gradually figured out a set of rules in his mind. Now it was time to see if this set of rules was correct. Chapter 678. The two main points of this set of rules had something in common with the way of painting turning illusions into reality, and the method he used to create a body for the 9th young master. First, it needed a core. Second, it needed the power to wrap around the core. It could also be said that first, it needed a source of power. Second, it needed a method to guide the power from the source to here. This world had incense and the power of wishes. Many people believed or seemed to believe in something. Then they could actually create it. This was a rule that was different from his world. Li Yunxin believed that there was a theory that could explain this rule. In the end, it could even be summarized into the knowledge system of his world. However, the technology tree of this world seemed to have been skewed at the beginning because of the unique base environment. Thus, no one had taken this path. What he could do now was just like the Middle Ages in his world. He could only start from the surface and not seek to understand it fully. Based on his deduction, if the rules of the two worlds had something in common, then was the existence of the evil king and the 7 sons also due to the power of wishes. In his original world, at least tens of millions of people knew of these two things. Thus, they produced a powerful power of wishes. The art saint used some method, the technique of turning illusions into reality, to first create a core in this world. Then, through this core, he guided the power of wishes of the tens of millions of people in his world into this world. Because of the established rules of this world, the power of wishes became the powerful power that the evil king possessed. He created a mysterious realm demon. Speaking roughly from the perspective of quantity, the hundreds of millions of people in the Li kingdom created Emperor Li, who was at the peak of the mysterious realm. The tens of millions of people of the Qing kingdom created a real Qing emperor. The power of wishes that the evil king possessed might not lose to that of Emperor Li. However, it should belong to the weak faith category. Thus its power was between the two. If this deduction was correct, then it would create a few other problems. When he was in the city of Wei, he had just stepped into the mysterious realm and created a dragon lady body for Mrs. Sanhua. The dragon lady was originally something that existed in his world. The number of people who knew of her existence should be in the millions or tens of millions. Such a thing was brought into this world by him. So it should have been extremely powerful and possessed the same divine powers as the evil king. But the result was that she could only unleash the power of her physical body. There was no miraculous ability that exceeded common sense. Furthermore, he was foolish to begin with. He was merely a shell without a soul. Later on, he created the body of the 9th young master Ba Wei. And he succeeded. That body was extremely powerful and possessed divine abilities. This matter was indeed an experiment of his. The cores of the two experiments were created by him, through the methods of the painting Tao. But the first wish power came from his world, and the second wish power came from this world. Li Yunqin felt that this factor should not affect the results of the experiment too much. With the example of the evil king and the 7 sons, it had already proved that the will of his world should be usable. Then the difference should be in the core. Although they both used the methods of the painting Tao, the 9th young master's core had 2 layers, while the dragon lady's core only had 1 layer. The second layer of the 9th young master's core was the Ba Wei body, and the core of the Ba Wei body was the token that came from the scale shard on Shinryu's body. It seemed that the shard had played a key role. At that time, he felt a little regretful. If he could return to the past, he would cut open the bodies of the evil king and the 7 sons, and carefully look inside to see if there was anything he did not expect. Thus, a few days ago, he obtained a drop of Shinryu's blood, and through the 9th young master, he obtained another scale. Now he spent a lot of effort to divide the scale into many pieces, and then created the people on the rock and the sea. The people on the rock and the sea were the 2 experimental control groups. They were used to test the different performance under the situation of the amount of willpower. The people on the rock were characters from a famous game in his previous world. The number of believers should be huge. As for the soldiers on the sea, the source of willpower should be a certain group of cold weapon enthusiasts, which was considered a very small group. As for the drop of red on his forehead, he risked his life and endured great pain to obtain it from Shinryu. Once he verified his idea through this experiment, he would be able to play a greater role. These 2 things seem easy to obtain, but it was the result of meticulous planning. But even so, compared to their possible use, it seemed to be a little too easy. Did Shinryu know about these things? Did he know about the rules that he was guessing now? Shinryu 2,000 years ago, when he appeared with the art saint, how did he come about? The idea that had been lingering in his heart, but he did not dare to confirm it, seemed to be about to be confirmed. Thus, Li Yunqin lowered his head, and used the pen in his hand to mark something on the book, and said in a low voice, "Go." The first row of soldiers armed with broadswords swarmed towards the front of the vast army 100 miles away. At this time, people finally realized that these soldiers with strange weapons were not ordinary people. They stepped on the surface of the sea, but did not sink. Wherever they stepped on, the surface of the sea turned flat, and a chill spread. It was actually frozen. Li Yunqin nodded slightly. This was a magical ability that he had specially added when he was drawing these people. Now, it seemed to be a part of it. Little Colonel looked at him from the side, completely confused. For a smart person like Li Yunxin, the way he spoke was actually very similar to the art saint in the translucent jade scroll. He always liked to jump around in his thoughts. The things he said to Little Colonel often did not make sense. So how could this little demon understand? But even if he did not understand what he was saying, he could see what was happening in front of him. In a war, having more people did not mean winning. The most important thing was the formation. Li Yunxin did not have many opportunities to come into contact with these things before, and now he just wanted to give it a try. So he did not care too much. But in Little Colonel's eyes he became anxious. He knew that his life was now in the hands of this Wei River Dragon King. If this Dragon King died, he probably would not survive either. So he said anxiously with fear and trepidation, Dragon King, I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. At this moment, Li Yunxin was sitting on the stone pillar, quickly writing something down in the book. Hearing this, he said without raising his head, Then don't say it. Little Colonel was about to say something, but he stopped. After holding it in for a while, he said with a red face and ears, Then I have to say it even if I have to risk my life. Only then did Li Yunxin move his eyes away from the book, looked at him and frowned. After thinking for a while, he threw a small flag to him and said, Take it and play with it. Little Colonel hurriedly caught the flag in his hand. When he was about to ask again, he felt a mysterious power coming from the flag. That power was connected with the soldiers who were running forward. Undoubtedly, it was the flag that could control them. He thought that he would have to spend a lot of effort to persuade this unexpected Dragon King to listen to his suggestions. Unexpectedly, happiness came so suddenly. He gave him the flag. After being stunned for a while, he hurriedly immersed his divine sense into it. Little Colonel's cultivation was indeed low, but he was smart. Otherwise, he would not have been favored by Lord Donghai, and he would not have been sent to serve Li Yunxin. Since he held the position of captain in the Donghai army, he was better than Li Yunxin when it came to marching and fighting. After a few breaths, he barely knew how to use it. Then he hurriedly waved the flag and ordered the soldiers to form a cone-shaped formation. In this era, the pace of marching and fighting was very slow. It was common for the two sides to arrange their troops and engage each other for several hours. Now the demon army on the sea and Li Yunxin's heavenly soldiers were not ordinary people, but they were not fast either. Little Colonel changed the formation, but there was still some distance between him and the vast army. He felt a little relieved and thought about the crossbowmen and the soldiers on the bed. But he found that they were still standing under the stone pillar, and it seemed that they did not intend to move. However, the command flag in his hand could only command the soldiers who were wielding the broadswords, and could not command these people. So he said carefully, Dragon King, these soldiers, I think. Just stay here. Li Yunxin did not look at him. It's 100 miles away. Are you afraid that we can't hit them? Little Colonel finally confirmed that this Wei River Dragon King really did not know how to use troops. Maybe he was used to being a big demon. 100 miles was a very short distance for a big demon, but not all the soldiers were big demons. In a war, a person's magical power was not important, but the cooperation of the formation was important. These crossbowmen and soldiers on the bed couldn't even see the enemy from 100 miles away. And they couldn't even tell the enemy from the enemy. What was the use? Moreover, which small demon could hit 100 miles away? He was not the only one who thought like this. The four Dragon King were shocked when they saw Li Yunxin dared to send troops to attack. But then they realized the same thing as Little Colonel. This Li Yunxin did not know how to fight a war at all. Everyone knew that the infantry was in front, and the archers were behind, but they also knew how to coordinate. If he ordered the infantry to attack like this, it was almost like sending them to their deaths. When the infantry died, the archers would be very weak. All the generals under their command knew this, but Li Yunxin did not. When the North Sea Dragon King saw this, he heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. He stretched out his hand and pointed into the distance. Lord Vast Expanse, this Wei River Dragon King's battle technique AI isn't too brilliant. Look, the few of us, we're all here to support Lord Howhan. He frowned and waved his hand. No, what do you mean by stealing the credit? He spread his hand again. Who are we bragging to, Don't you think so? Chu Liao Dragon King and Chichuan Dragon King hurriedly said. Yes, yes. Lord Howhan, you can't be impulsive and delay the battle. Otherwise, the three of us can send troops to help Lord Howhan scout the situation first, so that your soldiers can rest for a while. Chapter 679. The vast Dragon King looked at them with a straight face, not saying a word. Seeing that the two Dragon King coughed in embarrassment, he suddenly smiled coldly. All right. You two go. The two Dragon King were stunned. Didn't you want to take advantage of the situation? Lord Vast Expanse smiled coldly. Since you saw that this Li Yunxin doesn't know anything about military affairs, and doesn't have any strategy, I'm sure the three of you are eager to try. Thinking that if you can defeat him in front of the demons, wouldn't that be a great merit? He took 2 steps forward, his gaze sliding across the 3 Dragon Kings' bodies, and said mockingly, Of course you won't be able to report your merits, but you can earn some face in front of the demons, and let everyone in the ocean know. The Vast Expanse army has always called itself the strongest in the ocean, but in front of Li Yunxin, they lost with their faces covered in dirt. Now that he has sent out his troops, and you've led your troops to help the Vast Expanse army, you've actually beaten back his menacing army. Hee, isn't that a great honor, and a great merit? After saying this, Lord Vast Expanse turned around and walked back to his throne. The North Sea Dragon King hurriedly said, Aya, how can you say that? I didn't mean that. Lord Vast Expanse smiled again. Old dragon, if you say something like that again, I'm going to turn against you. I can tolerate you guys coming to take advantage of me. But on the other hand, you're trying to fool me with stupid words. Do you think I'm stupid? When I do things, I always like to say things clearly, unlike you cowards who say one thing and do another. Since you want to go, then go. Do you think I'm joking? Those who were familiar with the Vast Expanse Dragon King all knew that if he kept calling him, he would most likely fly into a rage. The North Sea Dragon King stopped smiling at this point. He stood up, no longer hiding his expression, and looked suspiciously at the Dragon King on the throne. Lord Vast Expanse. Why? The Vast Dragon King curled his lips and waved his hand. I was defeated by Li Yunxin. To tell you the truth, I'm still worried that he might have some tricks up his sleeves. If something were to go wrong this time, it would be a disgrace. In Lu Ke's words, a disgrace to his grandmother's house. Then you guys can go. Even if I win, it's just a small merit. If I lose, it's not like I'll lose face. He leaned forward slightly and looked at the 3 Dragon King. His expression became fierce again. But if you still want to take credit after winning the first battle and finding out the real situation of Li Yunxin's troops, I'll be frank with you first. Yesterday, I've transferred another 80,000 troops here. They're on the way. Don't blame me for killing you too. The Dragon King of the North Sea coughed and waved his hands. No, we're brothers, how could we? As he said this, he looked at the 2 Dragon King beside him and laughed. Then shall we first do this for Lord Vast Expanse? The 2 could no longer hold themselves back and agreed in unison. The old Dragon King of the North Sea suddenly straightened his body and returned to his old but firm and spirited appearance. He shouted in a deep voice, Gather the troops. The 3 Dragon Kings had only brought a total of 3,000 troops. But they were the elites of the elites. They were their bodyguards. Most of them were at the peak of the emptiness realm, and some were at the transcendent realm. In terms of combat power, they might be stronger than the vanguard of the Vast Expanse army. Although the emptiness realm and the transcendent realm were not great demons, when they were organized into an army and armed with formations and weapons, their power could not be measured simply by their realms. After a few orders, the 3 sea beastkin armies in bright armor gathered together and formed a formation. In one spurt of energy, they advanced for over 20 li and waited for the arrival of the troops under Li Yunxin's command. The 4 necromancers of the lifeless immortal sect also saw this scene. San Fengzi frowned. Why are they not Lord Vast Expanse's men? Qin Fengzi looked towards the center of the army and said, I'm afraid that my lord is afraid of Li Yunxin. He is worried that this is another one of his tricks. But the 3 lords of my junior martial brothers are full of confidence and have taken on this task. Saying this, he shook his head. I'm also curious what other tricks Li Yunxin has up his sleeves. Let's wait and see. At this time, the 2 armies were only about 10 li apart. Different from Li Yunxin's Tang army, whose steps and expressions were the same. The demon soldiers of the Dragon King of the 3 Seas were very agile. They formed a 3-layer formation. The first row was made up of heavily armored infantrymen. Every one of them was as tall as 3 strong men in the mortal world. They looked like a row of small mountains, protruding from the surface of the sea. They were wearing shell armors that were enchanted with magic. They were lighter and sturdier than normal iron armors. Because they were the personal soldiers of the Dragon King, there were beautiful carvings on their armors that were plated with gold powder. And because the sea was rich in resources, the armors of the generals who led the army were decorated with resplendent gems that glittered under the sunlight. This row of heavily armored infantrymen was lined up in one place. They held huge shields and long swords in their hands. They looked like an impregnable great wall of the sea. Behind them was a row of long spear soldiers. These long spear soldiers weren't holding ordinary weapons. Instead, they were radiants formed from demon power. They were at least 30 zhang long, and were held in their hands. They stretched out from the waists and shoulders of the heavily armored infantrymen, causing the surrounding air to distort. Slightly further behind, and further away were the archers. But the weapons in their hands weren't ordinary bows and arrows. In fact, they were completely different from the bows and arrows of the mortal world. They were in groups of 3. 2 of them cast their arts, and pulled open a screen of light in midair. The other person cast a spell behind the screen of light. Countless densely packed, rapidly spinning bright red dots appeared on the screen of light. Just by looking at it from afar, one could tell that it contained violent power. The sharp whistling sound made the surface of the water incessantly stir up tiny splashes, which then evaporated into a vast mist that hid these archers. In another 15 minutes, the faces of those Tang soldiers could be seen. They all looked the same. They all looked like Li Yunxin. They were tall and burly, but not as tall as the heavily armored demon soldiers in the first row. When they were about 2 li away from the demon soldiers, they raised the big swords in their hands. The reflected sunlight illuminated a large area of the sea. The seawater quickly condensed in front of them, but the demon soldiers didn't move. When they were about 1 li away, a long command sounded from the demon army. Ready, fire! The first 2 rows of demon soldiers didn't move, but the last row of archers suddenly shone brightly. Countless lines of fire rose from the formation. In the blink of an eye, they covered the sky and formed a screen of fire. It was as if the whole sky was burning, or as if a cloud of fire had appeared out of nowhere. This cloud of fire was like a huge blanket, covering the front line of the Tang soldiers. There was almost no sound. More than 3,000 infantry soldiers disappeared in an instant. They didn't even have time to scream, and turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. Even the hard ice on the surface of the sea was blasted away, and the seawater gushed out again. After this round of firing, there were only about 1,000 soldiers left. But they still didn't show any fear or any expression. Even their steps were not messed up. They still rushed out of the fire and smoke, and went straight to the front of the formation. It was as if everyone only had one goal: to move forward. Other than that, even things like killing the enemy and protecting their lives could be ignored. The moment the command to fire sounded, the 4 Dragon King, sitting in the middle of the formation, all straightened their bodies subconsciously. Although they all felt that Li Yunxin didn't understand the battle formation and sent these infantry soldiers to their deaths, they still felt a little uneasy. For example, if these guys were as strong as those ferocious beasts, it would be very difficult to deal with them. Only when they saw that they were shrouded in the cloud of fire and had no chance to resist were they relieved. They knew that it was reasonable. North Sea Dragon King exhaled lightly, smiled. and looked at the gloomy Lord Howhan. It's time for us to do this for Lord Howhan. So Lord Howhan glared at him. Then he frowned and looked at Li Yunxin on the stone pillar far away. What the hell is he doing? At this time, Li Yunxin was also watching. His expression was very calm. It was as if what turned into ashes was not his soldiers, but some numbers on a piece of paper. He was calm, but the colonel beside him couldn't be calm. That attack just now should have wiped out more than 3,000 soldiers. Fortunately, he was in the middle and told them to dodge, so that they could survive. But he was already panicking. He thought that this way River Dragon King told them to move forward bravely because of their strong bodies. Who knew that now, they were not even as strong as ordinary demon soldiers. It was fine if they were few and weak. But they didn't cooperate, wouldn't they lose for sure? If they lost, what would he do? He had a bad habit, and that was when he panicked he would stutter. Dragon, 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 dragon king this. Li Yunxin turned to look at him. What's wrong? The colonel stared at him and pointed forward. Dragon King, look at this, more than half of the casualties. I think it's better. Li Yunxin turned his face away, jotted something in his notebook and said casually, Then you did a good job. I thought we were all going to die. Keep up the good work. The Dragon King. The junior colonel was on the verge of tears. The Dragon King is very resourceful. Even if he's defeated, he'll still have a way to escape. But I have parents and I have. Stop acting like a spoiled child. Be quiet. Li Yunxin became impatient and shouted, Did Donghai Emperor send you here to cry for me? Go to the front if you want to make a scene. The colonel quickly shut up and panicked again. Did not know what to say. Li Yunxin lowered his head and jotted something in his notebook. In the span of a few words, the Tang soldiers had already rushed to the front of the demon army. At this time, Li Yunxin straightened up and even slightly narrowed his eyes, as if he finally became serious. But he still did nothing and just watched carefully, not letting go of any detail. The remaining Tang soldiers barely maintained a cone-shaped formation and bumped into them. Dozens of people in the front were immediately pierced by the light spears of the spearmen, but they did not die and continued to move forward bravely without any fear or pain. At this time, these soldiers showed some of the skills that Wei River Dragon King's soldiers should have. The light spears of the demon soldiers were not only sharp, but also had other magical powers. If it was a battle between mortals, the first row of spears would retreat and stab again after piercing through the enemy. But the light spears did not need to retreat. Instead, they flickered and soon exploded the punctured wounds. The golden light flashed 3 or 4 times, and a burly Tang soldier was blown into pieces. But the Tang soldiers only broke through 1 point. After nearly 100 casualties, they finally met the enemy. They met the huge shields of the first row of demon soldiers. The square shields were linked together, flickering with light. It was obvious that they were also enchanted with magic. Although the sabers in the hands of the Tang soldiers were big, they were like daggers in front of the heavily armored soldiers. These soldiers, who finally rushed to the front after paying a huge price, immediately raised the sabers in their hands and slashed at the enemy without any expression. But they did not cut through the shields first. The light flashed, and it seemed that the magic inhibition was the first to bear the attack. After about 2 or 3 flashes, the magic inhibition was finally broken by the sabers. But they could only hear a continuous dang-dang sound, as if someone was hitting a porcelain bottle with a wooden stick. Finally, all the Tang soldiers bumped into the first row of the demon army. But it was like a gentle and powerless stream bumping into a hard reef. It only took a quarter of an hour. The remaining Tang soldiers were completely annihilated outside the first row, and could not even cut through one side of the square shields. It was like a drama with a strong beginning and a weak ending. It started with a bang, but ended in the blink of an eye. The surface of the sea was calm again, and the ice where the Tang soldiers passed quickly melted, and the water sparkled again. The 4 Dragon Kings called Zhongjuan were stunned for a while. Then the North Sea Dragon King coughed. This is really. He wanted to say it was just a farce, or it was just SOSO. He wanted to say, did Lord Howhan really lose to this kind of person? But when he saw the Dragon King's gloomy face, he could only say, "This is really an easy first merit. Lord Howhan, no matter what tricks he has up his sleeves. We have all taken them. Maybe this Lord Howhan doesn't even need to do anything, we can capture him. And then let you deal with him. Don't you think so? Ha ha ha." The Dragon King stared coldly at the 3 Dragon Kings for a while, and then took a deep breath. "I advise you not to celebrate too early. This Li Yunxin is cunning. I'm afraid it was just a diversion, and he still has tricks up his sleeves." As he said this, he raised his hand and pointed into the distance. "He still has those crossbow soldiers. Why don't they come forward? Can they shoot from 100 miles away? If they stay there, I'm afraid they will have other tricks later." But when he said this, he was stunned again. Far away in the sky, a dark cloud suddenly appeared. He was shocked, and got up from his throne to take a closer look. That was indeed a cloud. But it was a cloud of arrows. Innumerable arrows were shot into the sky, whistling straight in their direction. When the Tang soldiers were all wiped out, the only one who looked worse than Lord Howhan was probably the lieutenant colonel next to Li Yunxin. Holding the useless flag, he stood there in a daze, but did not dare to act like a spoiled child again. All he saw was Li Yunxin writing something down in his blue notebook, and mumbling something. He could not hear clearly, and could only make out some vague words. For example, things like "indeed strengthened." But that shouldn't be the case. It should be the overall effect. These people are not good enough. There is indeed a critical value, and so on. Chapter 680. It was not until Li Yunxin stopped writing and sat down as if she was thinking about something again that he carefully whispered, "Dragon King, now, what should we do?" Li Yunxin threw away his brush and stood up. After muttering angrily, he looked at him seriously. "Don't you know, negative emotions are contagious? I'm fighting and listening to you cry the whole time. I'm telling you now, my patience has run out. Get lost." After saying this, he suddenly waved his hand, and a gust of demonic wind sent the little scroll to the bottom of the stone pillar. Under the stone pillar were the crossbow soldiers. The arrows on the huge crossbow bed of the Song soldiers were as long as 3 people, and as thick as a thigh. The little scroll was sent to the crossbow by the demonic wind, and was immediately restrained by an invisible force. Only then did he scream, Dragon King, what are you doing? I'm here to help you." Li Yunxin clasped his hands behind his back on the stone pillar and laughed coldly. "Why aren't you stuttering now? Go back and tell your Lord Dong Hai. Telling the horse to run, and telling the horse not to eat grass. I said I'd help him to pacify the 9 seas, so he came to help. In the end, he sent a piece of trash like you. Now I'm surrounded here. I'm so frustrated." "Fuck, no need." Li Yunxin glared at him. "If you want to live, go tell that Lord Howhan." He narrowed his eyes and laughed coldly. "In his army, those people from the lifeless immortal sect are preparing to plot against them. Their 10,000-year-old ancestor is in cahoots with the Shinryu. They're the ones who told me to come here to cause trouble and kill Dragon King." The little scroll's eyes widened. Li Yunxin snorted. "What? Otherwise, how do you think I know that every army is using the 5 elements formation? The formation I is on the leading general, but Sheng, Du, Jing and Xiu gates are broken. Otherwise, how do you think I know that every army is using the soul-seizing formation underwater? Otherwise, how do you think I killed my way into the middle army? Because those people from the lifeless immortal sect went easy on us. Damn it." Li Yunxin paced back and forth on the stone pillar. "You asked me to do something. In the end, I've been stuck here alone for so long. My entire army is about to be wiped out, and no reinforcements have come. All of you on the sea are a bunch of cowards. Coward. Then we'll all die together. Do you see this? Did you see that?" He raised his hand and pointed at the blood on his forehead. "Shinryu gave it to me. Have you heard of that legend? There's a treasure on the Cloud Mountain, and if I get it, I'll be able to control all the demons in the world." "Why, if you haven't heard of it, they must have heard of it, that's the thing. If they wanted it, they could take it with their own abilities. I'll give it to you when I get it." Damn it, fire the arrows. Li Yunxin raised his hand and pointed. The thousands of crossbowmen immediately acted like one person and pulled the trigger in unison. A buzzing sound that caused the stone pillar to tremble was heard. The arrows that covered the sky and the earth shot out hundreds of miles away. The small colonel let out a miserable scream in midair. But very quickly, it spiraled far away and could no longer be heard. The irritable expression on Li Yunxin's face immediately calmed down. He turned around, raised his hand, and pointed at the dozens of other characters from his world on the stone pillar. Go, 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 you guys go too. These dozens of people were not as stupid as those soldiers. Hearing his words, they actually reacted. But they were still slightly sluggish, not as nimble as ordinary people. The green-armored swordsman held the long blade in his hand horizontally, and said in a low muffled voice, "Summoner, where is this?" "Bastard Canyon," Li Yunxin said snappily. "The enemy will arrive at the battlefield in 30 seconds. Go quickly. Crush them." Hearing his words, these dozens of people seemed to have received some kind of order, a hint. Their expressions immediately turned serious, and like the wind, they jumped off the stone pillar and ran far away. So Li Yunxin reached out his hand and pressed the drop of blood on his forehead, then turned around expressionlessly. Qin Fengzi was able to deduce some things. How could someone as smart as him not be able to deduce it? Since the ancient times, when two armies fought, there had never been anyone who would suddenly collude with the enemy and plan to betray them. Although he wasn't clear about the details of the lifeless immortal sect, he knew that people with normal intelligence wouldn't use Qin Fengzi's method to lure them to surrender. This meant that what he said was very likely true. Previously, when he fought against the Purple Knight Enlightened, the guy who didn't leave a bad impression on him didn't use his full strength at the start. Actually, at that time, he was already a little suspicious. It was also at that time that he did something daring. He borrowed a magical ability from the Shinryu to block the Purple Knight Enlightened's second attack. Borrowing a magical ability wasn't a rare thing. Low-level demons could attach themselves to a human and walk around using the human's body. This could also be considered a kind of borrowing a magical ability. However, there were only two more profound methods. One was when one side's cultivation was overwhelming the others. For example, the profound realm against the transcendent realm, or the true realm against the emptiness realm. One could borrow a magical ability. But under these circumstances, the borrowed magical ability wasn't very useful. It was purely for fun. The other was through some kind of secret method. For example, if two people were in some kind of formation, they could use the formation's power to transform and borrow the magical ability. But this kind of formation was extremely mysterious and only existed in legends. At the time, Li Yunxin borrowed Shinryu's magical ability and used this method to create a formation. But in reality, he didn't know anything about this borrowing magical ability formation. The reason he could do this was because of another reason, a reason that would soon be known by others. And the reason he did this was to test the strength of the current Shinryu. From the time he left Dingzhou until now, he had encountered a total of 2 unimaginable situations. The first time was when he fought against Daolord Dragon 5th at the foot of Cloud Mountain. Someone very far away from him, had interfered with the Reiki of heaven and earth around him. That kind of technique could be described as moving 1,000 pounds with little effort. At an extremely critical moment, that person used an extremely small movement to cause great damage to him. At that time, his spiritual power was instantly cut off, and he couldn't circulate it properly. If he didn't have a backup plan, he would have been defeated by the Daolord. That person really wanted him dead. And that kind of power. Li Yunxin thought about it for a long time afterward, and realized that it didn't belong to either the Xianmen or the Painting Dao. At that time, that person was by Li Chuanfeng's side, and Li Yunxin thought that that person was the mysterious owner of Southwood House. The second time was in the East Sea. The person who displayed some kind of unimaginable power was the Heavenly Lord Shinryu. When he risked a showdown with her, the furious Heavenly Lord Shinryu almost set the entire ocean on fire, and almost burned the body of a powerful dragon son like Li Yunxin into ashes. There were many forms of power. To create the effect at that time, Li Yunxin could do it with a little effort. But at his current level of cultivation, he could see through the surface and see the essence. Therefore, he realized that what Shinryu used was not any kind of power that belonged to the Xianmen or the painting Dao. In fact, it wasn't even the magical power of the dragons. The methods used by the owner of Southwood House and Shinryu were similar, but also very different. When the owner of Southwood House made her move, she seemed to like moving 1,000 pounds with little effort. She exerted force in the smallest areas, causing a huge impact. But when Shinryu made her move, whether it was the first time they met in Dongting, or when she was angry in the ocean, the momentum was huge. Although the huge momentum and the fierce method were indeed in line with the identity of the Heavenly Lord Shinryu, as the master of all monsters in the world. But from another point of view, it was a loss of dignity to make such a big move to deal with the inferior. The thought of life and death of the person in power could only be seen in a smile. Only an ordinary person would frown and want blood to splash 5 steps away. Combined with the past of her, using all kinds of tricks to drive a wedge between Dragon Sun and the two of them to fight each other, Li Yunxin felt that it was a sign of a guilty conscience. For example, people who were born in poverty liked to show off their wealth after they became rich. But people from aristocratic families rarely did so. Weak people always liked to bluff and make people feel that they were inviolable. But the real powerful people didn't easily make a move. However, this may also be a personal preference and style. He himself was a typical example of someone who liked to show off. Therefore, he took another risk. Through his means he borrowed the power of Shinryu during the fight with the Purple Knight Immortal to resist his blow. The damage suffered by the borrowed power would be faithfully reflected back to the person who borrowed it. And the result of this risk was that Shinryu didn't show up. She didn't show up that time, and she didn't show up for the next few days, even if Li Yunxin called for her several times. Then, according to the rumors in the ocean, the reason why the Heavenly Lord Shinryu and the lifeless immortal sect's 10,000-year-old ancestor were at peace was because they knew that the old ancestor didn't have any ulterior motives and was only focused on teaching. But now, through Qin Fengzi, Li Yunxin knew that the lifeless immortal sect not only had ulterior motives, but also seemed to be planning something big. They had been planting their own people in the 9 seas for such a long time. Could it be that they hadn't been noticed? The 9 seas shouldn't be full of idiots. At least from the way that the Heavenly Lord Shinryu was tirelessly scheming, she should be extremely wary of the 10,000-year-old ancestor. But she actually got along with him. There was only one possibility. Shinryu and the 10,000-year-old ancestor were conspiring. Li Yunxin had proof. The 10,000-year-old ancestor had planted his own people in the 9 Seas army. And Shinryu also wanted to get rid of the Dragon King of the 9 Seas. There was no one in the world who was more like-minded than this. Knowing this, the situation in the ocean became more interesting. Li Yunxin didn't doubt that he was also a part of the plan that Shinryu and the 10,000-year-old ancestor had discussed. Or maybe just a part that was added at the last minute. But since it was last minute, there would always be variables. If he didn't stir up the situation now, how could he be worthy of this last minute? Motherfucker. Even a cat or dog dares to make use of me. Li Yunxin's face was expressionless, but he was cursing in his heart. Then I'll trick you to death. But he wasn't the only one cursing in his heart. The small colonel was bound by his demonic energy to the huge crossbow and shot high into the sky. At first, he was still praying that the arrows would fall midway, so that he could escape from Li Yunxin's 100-kilometer formation. But after 6 breaths, he realized that something was wrong. The arrow rain was rising very high. Looking down from the highest point, Lord Boundless Formation was like a square on the sea, and he could even see the vague formation under the sea. It was the soldiers under the water. He looked back in the whistling wind, and was immediately scared out of his wits. He was now in the middle of Li Yunxin and the vast army. This meant the arrow rain began to fall. The lethality of the arrows gradually increased as they fell. The small colonel clearly realized that the arrows were so fast that they didn't just rely on the power of the crossbow. He only felt that his internal organs were hanging in the air. as if they were going to jump out through his spine. The 3 rows of vanguard troops below, who had killed thousands of Tang soldiers without any damage, grew rapidly, and he could almost see their expressions. Even the slowest demon soldiers widened their eyes. Just like the 4 dragon kings in the central army, they didn't expect that the arrows would come so far and so fast. At this moment, dozens of figures suddenly jumped up from the sea, and then crashed into the first row of heavy-armored infantry. The light spears of the second row of spearmen were useless against them. First, a stone giant with flames flowing all over his body like bulging veins crashed into the formation. A huge wave splashed on the sea, and nearly 100 heavy-armored demon soldiers around seemed to become weightless leaves, and were pushed up into the sky along with the wave. Before the stone giant could finish his attack, a huge indigo bull demon rushed in, punched the sea with both fists, and blew up another 100 people. But before those 200 people fell, a green light suddenly appeared in the sky, and shuttled through those leaves, at an incredible speed, only to see clouds of mist exploding in the air one after another. Before they could fall, or even before they could use their demon power, they were all cut into halves. The small colonel's vision was blocked by the dense arrows, and they were falling fast, so he couldn't see the whole picture of the 3 lines. However, they could still catch a glimpse of a green, human-shaped snake demon through the gaps, turning dozens of people into stone statues and sinking into the ocean without a sound. Then, a warrior holding a spear with his hair tied up like a dragon leaped into the 3rd row of archers. With a sweep of his spear, a group of people around him was thrown off their feet. The demonic power that was gathering in a hurry went out of control and exploded, affecting hundreds of people around him. Then, a small mummy wrapped in moldy green bandages suddenly used its power, and a huge golden light array appeared around it, killing more than 100 demons. These scenes made the small colonel extremely surprised, and this surprise even temporarily suppressed his fear. These guys were so strong. If he had known this, he wouldn't have complained, and annoyed that Wei River Dragon King so much that he threw him out. But the arrow rain had fallen. Those dozens of people had already caused the 3 rows of battle formations to be in a state of disarray. At this moment, a large cloud of arrows hit the sea with a bang. A huge wave suddenly broke out in the vast water, as if a white-headed mountain rose from the sea. In such a fierce attack, the 3,000 elites brought by the Dragon King of the 3 Seas were all wiped out. At this time, only less than 7 minutes had passed since the 4 Dragon King saw the cloud of arrows in the sky. The ocean was quiet for a while. Even the demon kings watching the battle around them forgot to make noise. The situation changed so fast that it was beyond everyone's expectation. Previously, it took the 3,000 people less than 7 minutes to kill the thousands of Tang soldiers, led by Li Yunxin. Now, it took Li Yunxin's arrow rain and dozens of demons less than 15 minutes to kill the 3,000 vanguard soldiers. Right at this moment, when the waves that had been kicked up fell back into the sea, the voice of the Wei River Dragon King was heard again. "Courtesy demands reciprocity," he said lazily. "Do you think the star-destroying crossbows of Great Qin and the electromagnetic cannons of Great Song are undeserved?" Chapter 681. At this time, there was only the colonel left in the sea, which was originally filled with 3 rows of soldiers. The illusion spell that Li Yunxin cast on him had disappeared, revealing his original appearance. He stood on the water in a daze, at a loss of what to do. He had planned to use the chaos after the battle, and the dozens of demons as a cover to escape. But when it fell, the giant arrow that was attached to it hit a square shield. It shattered the square shield and made him dizzy. It took him a long time to come back to his senses. When he regained his consciousness and showed his face in a hurry, he found that he was in the middle of 2 armies. How could he dare to escape now? He was less than a mile away from the row of demon soldiers at the front of the vast army, and he was clearly seen by countless pairs of eyes. Although he was an inconspicuous colonel, many people recognized him, because he was favored by Lord Donghai, not to mention the fact that he came with the arrow rain. If he moved recklessly, he would be killed immediately. Even if he could escape from this place, Could he escape from the ocean? That Li Yunxin was indeed a demon among demons. Falling out with him just like that. Not leaving any leeway at all. It was also at this time that the colonel realized that if he didn't bring Li Yunxin's words to Lord Donghai, he might not be able to leave this sea alive. Although he was afraid of death, he was not afraid of dying for Lord Donghai. But he was afraid that if he died here, Lord Donghai would have no room to turn back. As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, the colonel immediately raised his hands and shouted, "I am the colonel of Donghai military, and I was ordered to hide beside Li Yunxin. Now that I have escaped from death, I have important news to tell Lord Haohan." After shouting like this 3 times, there was finally some sound coming from the surface of the ocean. It came from the demon kings who were watching the battle. A few days ago, when Li Yunxin defeated Han Haojuan and killed his way to the center of the army, the demon kings cheered and gloated. That was because no one believed that Li Yunxin could really win. It was like the people on the street watching a criminal who was about to be beheaded. If the prisoner in the prison cart was a coward, the people would certainly spurn him. However, if he was indifferent to life and death and had a heroic appearance, people would cheer for him and even send him a farewell wine. Although the sea demon monarchs weren't humans, their thoughts were similar. Since he wanted the power of the Dragon King, he would naturally be happy to see them suffer a setback and lose their prestige. But now, things were different. Li Yunxin's strength was beyond their expectations. Such a fellow, if he really won, wouldn't he become their opponent? Even a powerful army like the vast army had been defeated by him, so it was likely that they wouldn't have any more power in the 9 seas in the future. Therefore, by this time, there was no longer any cheering. Instead, a somewhat panicked atmosphere began to spread. This guy, just who the hell is he? Don't tell me I can't control him anymore. After 3 calls, another quarter of an hour passed before an officer rode the waves from the vast army. The green-faced Fang beast's face was extremely gloomy. When he was not far from the small school, he raised his hand and pointed the trident in his hand at him. "Hey, you are from the Eastern Sea Army," the small school officer hurriedly said. "Brother Qing Lin, you know me." "Of course I am, of course I am." He was an old friend. But at this time, the demon did not pay attention to him. Instead, it raised its hand and threw out a rope, which tied him up tightly. Then he shouted and dragged him back into the array. The small school officer didn't dare to say anything. He was already thankful that he was tied up and not killed. The small school officer was dragged all the way to the carriage of the middle army. The moment he saw the 4 dragon kings, whose faces had turned even gloomier, he knelt down with a thud and kept kowtowing. He cried bitterly, dear immortals, I almost thought that I wouldn't be able to come back." The 4 dragon kings looked at him and kowtowed. After a dozen breaths, Lord Haohan sneered. "I heard that you hid beside Li Yunxin and escaped from death?" The small school officer hurriedly said, Yes, I was under orders. You were under orders to expose us." Lord Haohan stared at him with hatred. "Hide? Hee. It's true that you were under orders. I'm afraid that you were under orders to help Li Yunxin deal with us. Otherwise," he pointed at the small school officer, "how did he come and go so freely in our 5 elements array and hit the eye of the array? I was puzzled before. So it was you damned things who were causing trouble. Guards." The small school officer hurriedly said, "My lord, please listen to me. There's a big secret behind this. My lord, I'll only dare to speak if you dismiss your subordinates. My lowly life is not to be regretted, but this is related to the rise and fall of the 9 seas. It won't be too late for my lord to kill me." But the soldiers on both sides had already strode over, grabbed his arms and dragged him to the back of the array. Lord Haohan still sat still. The small school officer panicked and shouted, "It's Wu Sheng." Lord Haohan frowned and gently raised his hand. The 2 soldiers stopped for the time being. The 3 dragon kings also frowned. They looked at each other. North Sea Dragon King said in a low voice, "Lord Haohan, why don't you listen to him first?" Boundless Dragon King waved his hand again. "Stand down." He didn't need to say it a second time. No one was stupid enough to think that they weren't included. The demon generals around the carriage immediately retreated. Lord Howhan waved his hand again, and a light shield rose from the throne enveloping them. Only then did the small school officer let out a sigh of relief. He was smart enough to know that he had to say those words to this boundless dragon king. He had never liked people from lifeless immortal sect. If he had said those words to other dragon kings, they would probably have suffered. "You're talking about lifeless immortal sect?" Lord Howhan asked. "That's right." The small school officer took a deep breath and pretended to be terrified and in disbelief. "I was hiding by Li Yunxin's side and heard him tell me a huge secret. The people from lifeless immortal sect in Lord Howhan's army. They were the ones who wanted to change sides at the front line. And they were the ones who revealed the details of Lord Howhan's army to Li Yunxin." The 4 dragon kings looked at each other. Lord Howhan looked at him again. "If it was you who made up these shocking words to survive." "This isn't the only shocking thing." Seeing Boundless Dragon King's expression, the small school officer became more courageous. "This is just the tip of the iceberg. I also heard that Li Yunxin said. He gritted his teeth and straightened his body. "This matter, Li Yunxin coming to our 9 seas to stir up trouble, is part of the plan of the Shinryu and the 10,000-year ancestor. They plan to kill the Dragon King of the 9 seas. And the people from lifeless immortal sect in each army are all spies. Once the time is right, they will stir up trouble together and trap us into a place of eternal damnation." He said all this in one breath, and then gritted his teeth again. It was not a big deal to implicate the 10,000-year ancestor. But he actually implicated the Shinryu. At this moment, there were only 2 endings waiting for him. Either he escaped from death, or he would be tortured and live a life worse than death for a long time to come. The 4 dragon kings were also stunned by his words. The small school officer thought that he would have to face their harsh questioning. Unexpectedly, the storm he expected didn't come. The 4 dragon kings looked at each other solemnly and fell silent. It was as if they already had this premonition in their hearts. At this time, an untimely thought suddenly appeared in his mind. That Li Yunxin told me to say these things. Did he know that these dragon kings would have this kind of reaction? How did he know? How did that guy know everything? The 4 dragon kings were silent for a while. Then Lord Beihai asked him, "Lord Donghai also knows about this?" The small school officer hurriedly kowtowed, reporting to Lord Laojun, "My lord has always had this suspicion, so he gathered you all together. But at that time, there was no conclusive evidence, so it was inconvenient to say. He only told everyone to stay together and adapt to the situation. He pretended to be on good terms with Li Yunxin and sent me to his side to gather information. I really escaped with my life by the skin of my teeth. Lord Laojun doesn't know how violent Li Yunxin's temperament is. It's really. At this point he wiped away his tears. Some of his tears were real. Who could stand the man on the stone pillar? Even his 2 attendants had left. Lord Howhan said in a low voice, "Humph, then our worries have come true. I always felt that there was something wrong with the people from lifeless immortal sect, but I couldn't find any evidence. Now," he squinted his eyes, "Shinryu? It's already been 1,000 years. I'm afraid that we will end up like those people 1,000 years ago. Then what should we do?" Chu Liao Dragon King shifted his body. "Are we going to fight against the Lord God?" At this point, he subconsciously shrunk his neck. It seemed that just thinking about this made him feel uneasy. Chi Chuan Dragon King was calmer than him, but not much better. He blinked uneasily. "The most important thing now is to return to the fief, calm the people, and deal with the big change. I think we should just retreat." Lord Howhan laughed coldly, staring at the 2 of them. Until the 2 of them were scared, he said, "Go back? Have you forgotten how we came here? You really believe this damn thing's words? Did they gather all of us for the sake of a foolproof plan? Heh, I think that Lord Donghai received a promise from Shinryu and thought that he could stay out of trouble, so he is helping Shinryu. It's to transfer us here. Unfortunately, we really fell for it and came. In my opinion, you will hear the news very soon. The fief has changed. If you go back now, won't you be walking right into a trap?" The 2 Dragon King were stunned. They felt that what he said made sense, but there was no way to think about it. Lord Beihai thought for a while, then said, "Then according to Lord Hauhan, what should we do?" Lord Hauhan Dragon King looked at the colonel. "Let me ask you, before Li Yunxin sent you away, was she irritable and restless because of the previous defeat? Did he curse at Shinryu and lifeless immortal sect?" "Yes." The colonel almost bit his tongue when he said this. Before I ran away, he was indeed angry, and said that Shinryu and lifeless immortal sect were all cowards, and that they only asked him to help. But he didn't do anything, he didn't want to. Lord Hauhan laughed coldly. "That's it. We were lured here to make it easier for them to do something to our fief. We have already fallen into the trap. At this time, we can't let them lead us by the nose." He frowned, his voice getting deeper. "This Li Yunxin first delayed my army here for 2 days. Just now, he used his special ability to intimidate us. In my opinion, he is just stalling for time. Using these 2 methods, he put himself in danger, dangerous." At this point, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he slapped the armrest. "Damn it! I say, the way he sent his clone over, wasn't it obvious that he was forcing someone to make a move? In the end, those people didn't make a move, and now he is angry." Lord Hauhan Dragon King stood up, anxiously paced 2 steps, and suddenly turned his head. "That's why. Since we are already in the trap, we have to fight our way out. First, we have to catch that Li Yunxin. That brat must know about the Shinryu and the Old Things plan. We have to capture him and interrogate him. Then we will have the upper hand. Only then will we have a chance to win." Chu Liao Dragon King and Chichuan Dragon King were dumbfounded by his words. North Sea Dragon King calmed down a little and quickly said, This Lord Hauhan, don't be anxious, this matter isn't clear yet. What if it's this and we are wrong?" Lord Hauhan glared. "Wrong? It's better to be wrong than to die. Are the 3 of you going to sit here and wait for death?" North Sea Dragon King hurriedly waved his hand. No, I'm just saying, wait a little more. If what Lord Hauhan said is true, this Li Yunxin delayed us here. Then there will be movement at home for the next few days. At that time, wait for how long? A few days? Or a few months? North Sea Dragon King sighed. What, wait for at least a? At this point, they suddenly heard a commotion coming from outside the Central Army. The 5 people in the seal looked in the direction of the sound, and saw a group of people suddenly emerging from the sea, appearing to the south of the Central Army. The people in the vast army quickly subdued them, but they discovered that the broken armor of the 16 people were all of different colors: red, blue, green, and yellow. This was not the color of overturned Dai shop, but the color of the sea demon's blood. Hauhan's army frowned, but North Sea Dragon King's eyes widened, and he suddenly stood up, and his words became more fluent. "It's my people." After saying this, he was slightly stunned. Hauhan's army had already ordered in a low voice, "Bring them in." The leader of the 16 people was quickly brought in front of the imperial carriage. Hauhan Dragon King waved his hand, and the miscellaneous people left, leaving only 6 people in the seal. The leader who was brought in saw North Sea Dragon King, and he immediately knelt down and kowtowed. His voice trembled. "Old Lord, something happened in the palace." Lord Beihai strode forward and bent down to wipe his face, wiping away the blood and dirt. He recognized this leader as General Jinlang of his palace. He shouted, "What happened?" But Hauhan snorted, and leaned his body on the throne. General Jinlang gritted his teeth and said, "The lifeless immortal sect people rebelled. They said that Old Lord and the Dragon Kings were defeated by Lu Ku, and that there are spies in the palace working with Lu Ku. They occupied our Square Pot Mountain and sealed Huang. We killed our way out." North Sea Dragon King's eyes widened, and he took 2 steps back, turning to look at Hauhan in disbelief. Chapter 682. The 4 celestial mountains on the sea were Dragon Island, Penglai, Yingzhou, and Fanghu. East Sea Lord ruled Penglai, West Sea Lord, who was killed by Red Lady, ruled Yingzhou, and North Sea Lord ruled Fanghu. These 3 celestial mountains had hidden entrances to Dragon Island. East Sea Lord was called Abyss, West Sea Lord was called Ruin, and North Sea Lord was called Wasteland. Now the lifeless immortal sect had sealed Wasteland, They don't want to send people to Dragon Island. Before hearing this bad news, Lord Howhan was irritable and anxious, while North Sea Lord looked very calm. But at this time, North Sea Lord was shocked out of his wits, while Lord Howhan was not anxious anymore. He said coldly, I guess Penglai and Ingzhou are also occupied by them. Am I wrong? It really is Shinryu and that old thing's collusion. They first sealed the entrance and want to destroy us in the wild sea. North Sea Lord, what do you say now? Are we still waiting? North Sea Dragon King was stunned for a while, then turned to ask General Jinlang, how many of you killed your way out? We have 5,000 people killing our way out. But the people from Lifeless Immortal Sect have all rebelled, and there are many experts from Ruoshui. There are at least 10 true realm experts. We can't use our formation, we aren't their match. And some also rebelled with the Lifeless Immortal Sect. They said that the old lord is no longer here, so they have to elect a new Dragon King from the generals. General Jinlang gritted his teeth. Many ungrateful people turned to them. North Sea Lord, this is a complete wipeout. Vast Dragon King laughed coldly. Lord Shinryu. Hee. Who would have thought that Lord Shinryu would collude with an outsider to plot against us 9 dragon sons? What are they going to do next? North Sea Dragon King stared at the general. Did you find out? The demon general only blinked. It happened so suddenly. Lord Howhan stood up. What happens next? Naturally we have to ask that Li Yunxin. It's a good thing the bad news came at the right time. So it's good news too. What are you waiting for? Lord Beihai took a deep breath, and suddenly straightened his back. Lord Vast, send the troops. Lord Vast Ocean then looked at Chuliao Dragon King, and Chichuan Dragon King. The two of them also stood up and said in unison, send the troops. Only then did he sneer. But now that the 3 of you are all alone, you can't stay here and watch the battle. This battle must be finished as soon as possible. You are all in the profound realm. Come with me to meet him. I've suffered a few days of vexation. I'm going to make him suffer. All troops. He dispersed the restriction and shouted, attack. Qin Fengzi, San Fengzi, and the other 2 necromancers had just finished discussing how to stall the dragon kings of the 4 seas here, when they heard the order of attack with all armies. They were slightly surprised. They didn't know how the 4 dragon kings could put aside their differences and work together so quickly. They thought that it might have something to do with the East Sea Army's lieutenant, who appeared at the front of the formation. They were at the north side of the vast army. There were nearly 10,000 people in the middle army, and they were spread out on the sea, so it was hard to detect what was happening in the south. In fact, there were people from the Lifeless Immortal Sect in the middle army. When they saw the situation in the south, they should have come to report. But at this moment, after Lord Vast Ocean's secret order was passed down, those people were quickly suppressed and couldn't do anything. This was related to the vast army's usual style. Since the Dragon King didn't like the people from the Lifeless Immortal Sect, his generals naturally followed suit. Thus, the soldiers weren't close to the people from the Lifeless Immortal Sect. At this moment, when the order was passed down, there was no need to talk about friendship. It was extremely efficient to catch them all. Just as the 4 were about to bid farewell and return to their respective lords, they suddenly saw a large group of soldiers riding on the waves and coming over. San Fengzi cupped his hands towards Qin Fengzi and said, it seems that your Dragon King is anxious and came to summon you. Senior Marshal Brother, let's split up and scout out the situation before discussing what to do. After saying this, he turned around and was about to leave. However, Qin Fengzi frowned and said in a low voice, wait. San Fengzi was stunned and asked, Senior Marshal Brother, do you have any other orders? Something is wrong. Qin Fengzi frowned and looked at the group of people rushing over from afar. He said in a low voice, General Jinghai, General Fengtu, General Hung Lan. He read out 11 names and realized that they were all titled generals in the Dragon King's personal army. Moreover, they had taken off their armors and lowered their heads, pretending to be soldiers. Because he knew that something was going to happen in the vast ocean, he became vigilant and took a few more glances. Once he saw through their disguises, Qin Fengzi was stunned for a moment before he shouted in a low voice, We're exposed. Run. Before he finished his words, he had already retreated more than 100 feet. The other three reacted slightly slower, about a breath's time later than him. But it was enough to kill them. At the moment when Qin Fengzi retreated, the disguised demon immediately attacked. At least 4 flashes of the power of the real realm, and more than 10 flashes of the peak of the transcendent realm, went straight for the 3 necromancers, who were about to escape, and killed them instantly. Qin Fengzi's cultivation level was not high, but his mind was clear enough. Seeing that his 3 junior martial brothers were killed, he immediately realized that he had nowhere to run. Necromancers were good at arrays, but a brilliant array was not something that he could do alone. He might be able to use a few methods from the lifeless immortal sect to delay for a while, but the ocean was vast, and there was almost no place to hide. Now that the matter of the lifeless immortal sect was exposed, the vast army would definitely want to see him alive or dead. In at most 15 minutes, he would be at his wits' end. It seemed like it was already a dead end. Qin Fengzi didn't have time to think. He used several kinds of camouflage techniques in order to buy some time, then threw out a few magic tools in an attempt to divert the enemy's pursuit. But the distance between them was so close. At this moment, he heard the war drums of the vast army, 12 rapid beats, followed by another 12 beats. He realized that this was the order for the whole army to attack. Then he felt the spiritual qi on the surface of the ocean, and the whole army started to move forward. After dodging 3 more powerful and violent demonic powers, a thought suddenly appeared in Qin Fengzi's mind. Since there was no way out, then he would face death and live. If he ran elsewhere, the pursuers could chase him without fear. But if he ran into Li Yunxin's army, they would definitely be afraid. Thanks to his long time spent with Lord Haohan, he knew that this Dragon King was very strict with his army. There were rules in the army. If there was no order from the general during a battle, anyone who dared to use weapons, even if the enemy was already in front of them, would be killed. If he rushed to the front of the vast army and ran to Li Yunxin, because of this military rule, and because they were going to fight with Li Yunxin, they might temporarily ignore him. They only captured him because they were afraid that the news would leak out. But if he ran to Li Yunxin's side, then after Li Yunxin was defeated he would still have to die. Wouldn't it save the vast army's energy? Luckily, the vast army's camp was originally at the edge of Li Yunxin's 50-kilometer formation. Thinking of this, Qin Fengzi immediately turned around and ran towards Li Yunxin's formation. This action caught the pursuers by surprise, and because of the aftermath of Li Yunxin's 2 victories, they suddenly felt an indescribable fear towards his formation. Thus they slowed down a bit. They were chasing, but Qin Fengzi was running for his life. Thus, he abandoned the last few important artifacts, and his figure flashed, and finally broke into the formation. When he reached the formation, he didn't run away, but rushed towards the front of the army. This action caused the pursuer to be taken aback again. Because of these 2 opportunities, this necromancer from the lifeless immortal sect finally rushed to the front of the army, and then flew towards the stone pillar, where Li Yunxin was. The vast Dragon King in the middle of the army saw the small figure from afar, and immediately sneered. Look, once he is exposed, he will immediately escape to Li Yunxin's side. He confessed without being pressed. Pass down the order, he said coldly. Let him go. Let him stand on Li Yunxin's side, and see the power of our vast army. Let him think, if he regrets making an enemy out of me. Qin Fengzi, who was in the place of the outer fringe, flew from the edge of the formation to not far away from the stone pillar, where Li Yunxin was. It took him about 15 minutes. This was his limit, and it was also an extremely long 15 minutes to him. He had been in the vast army for many years, and knew how powerful those people were. If he was unlucky, and the vast Dragon King ordered the archers to kill him on a whim, there was no way he could escape. Therefore, even with his iron-like skin, cold sweat seeped out of his forehead. It made him look like he was fished out of the sea. But at this moment, he realized that he was temporarily safe. He was less than 30 feet away from the stone pillar, where Li Yunxin was. He could already see the face of Li Yunxin, who was standing beside the stone pillar. This was the first time he saw the face of this Wei River Lord clearly, and he was slightly shocked. He thought that according to the way this Dragon King did things, he should be a gloomy and ugly fellow. But it was completely different from what he expected. Not only was he worthy of the evaluation of handsome, but he could also add the word extremely in front of this evaluation. Therefore, he was stunned and stopped moving forward. He planned to first find out this Dragon King's attitude, and then try to persuade him to temporarily accept him. This matter should be extremely difficult, but his life depended on it, so he had to take the risk. But when he noticed the expression on Li Yunxin's face, he was surprised again. This Wei River Dragon King, right now, his expression was very calm, and even had a hint of a smile on his face. He clasped his hands behind his back, and stared at Qin Fengzi for a while. Before Qin Fengzi could speak, he first spoke and nodded. "Hello." Qin Fengzi opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. In fact, he was more worried that this strange Dragon King would suddenly turn hostile and kill him in the next moment. Li Yunxin spoke again. "Turning hostile with the demon army? That's good. Come up." After saying this, he turned around and slowly walked to the center of the stone pillar. Qin Fengzi never thought that Li Yunxin would have such an attitude. He stared blankly for a while, and felt his body start to feel cold. That was because the sweat on his body was gradually disappearing. He then turned to look at the east. The vast army had already entered the formation, and was starting to adjust their formation. He was flying alone, so of course he was fast, but the army couldn't run. At least they couldn't run at the start. They would need about half an hour to reach here. And it was possible that Li Yunxin would activate the formation very soon, and start fighting from a place far away. If he still had a few hundred strange demon soldiers like before, this battle might be even longer. He then looked at the thousands of crossbow soldiers not far away from the stone pillar. They were all standing still like statues. Not even their hair was moving. After hesitating for about 10 breaths, Qin Fengzi made up his mind and landed on the stone pillar. At this time, he saw Li Yunxin's fingers were like swords as he drew the lines of the formation. His expression was very calm, as if he didn't care about the vast army that was less than 100 miles away. His fingers occasionally paused, and he slightly frowned, but he quickly continued drawing. So this formation isn't complete yet. Qin Fengzi had this thought in his mind. Then he felt that it was inconceivable. An incomplete formation already had such power. What if it was completed? What kind of formation is this? And the way Li Yunxin was drawing and pausing, it seemed like he was testing it. Qin Fengzi knew this feeling. When learning a formation, or when creating one, although he knew the general principles, he still had to carefully think and modify the details. But in the lifeless immortal gate, at least to him, who was praised as a rare genius by the ancestor, the process of modification and adjustment was extremely long and difficult. Cultivation techniques had been passed down for tens of thousands of years, and there were many geniuses in history who had already explored and solved many details that normal people couldn't imagine. Now, if he wanted to find a new path in a place that no one had explored before, it would be extremely difficult. From a certain point of view, this kind of exploration wasn't completely against the unknown. It was against the accumulated experience and knowledge of tens of thousands of years of predecessors. For him to make a satisfactory adjustment to his formation, it could be as short as a few days, or as long as a few years. But if this Li Yunxin was really doing what he was thinking, this speed was already unimaginable, and completely unimaginable. What? A terrifying person. Before flying to the stone pillar, Qin Fengzi was still thinking about the next step of escape. This Li Yunxin would definitely lose. He had to find a way to escape before he was defeated. But seeing this scene, he suddenly had a strange thought that even he himself couldn't believe. This Li Yunxin might be able to win? Li Yunxin was drawing the formation, while Qin Fengzi was standing and watching. After the time it took to drink half a cup of tea, the Wei River Dragon finally stopped. He shook his hands and let out a long breath, as if he wanted to rest. He also took this opportunity to look at Qin Fengzi. So what you said is true. Your lifeless immortal gate is working with the Shinryu to ambush the 9 Dragon King? Feng Shi frowned, not knowing what to say. Li Yunxin smiled. You don't have to be polite. Do you know why Lord Haohan suddenly captured you? He looked at him again. I sent someone to tell him. You, Dragon King, already knew about this? Qin Fengzi was slightly stunned. I guessed. Li Yunxin stopped and looked at him. At this time, the war drums on the sea surface were getting louder and louder. The army of Haohan had already advanced 10 miles into the formation. The army at the front was divided into 4 groups. And the army in the middle was also divided into 4 groups. Qin Fengzi realized that the army of Haohan wanted to surround the formation. Part 1. Dr. Li and Miss Yuan. Chapter 1. The young man in leather waved his phone and grinned. It's done. Then he walked away. Yuan Xiaolu let out an ah and wanted to reach out. But just like countless times before, she only thought about it. And finally sighed in her heart. She pressed 2+ on the milk tea machine. 1+ was to add lemon juice, and the other plus was to add brandy. This type of milk tea machine couldn't be reprogrammed or added other ingredients, theoretically speaking. But Yuan Xiaolu had recently been learning how to program. After the 3-month crash course, she tried it on this machine, and it was done. She was happy for a long time. But it wasn't because what I learned can be used, or maybe I don't need to sell milk tea anymore. In fact, she was very willing to continue doing the latter. As long as Dr. Li was still in this building, Dr. Li walked out of the building at 7:30 every night, and he would buy a cup of milk tea from her shop on the first floor. Most of the time, he would order a cup of lemon honey milk tea, but he didn't seal it. When Yuan Xiaolu put the cup on the small counter, he would take out a flat, silver wine flask from his pocket and pour a little bit into it. Then he would smile at her and politely say, "Now it's okay. Thank you." One day, Yuan Xiaolu finally got up the courage to ask him what kind of wine he was pouring. Dr. Li just said a name. She memorized the name in her heart and looked it up on the internet after he left. She found that the price was frighteningly expensive, equivalent to half a month's income. So she saved up for 3 months and ordered a bottle online. Fortunately, it was a very large bottle. If she added a little to the cup every day like Dr. Li did, it would last about 3 months. At that time, she could order a second bottle. Yuan Xiaolu still remembered that night. It was Christmas. It was snowing, and the sky turned dark very early. At around 6 o'clock, there were colorful drones flying in the sky, shuttling between the tall buildings. Their taillights cast long, colorful shadows that looked like silk ribbons. But the ribbons would eventually scatter into spots of light, like colorful raindrops. That night, Dr. Li came to buy milk tea as usual, and Yuan Xiaolu did the usual thing for him. But when he said no seal and put the cup on the counter, he didn't put it on the side next to Dr. Li, but on his side. When he was stunned for a moment, she took the bottle of wine she ordered from under the counter, not daring to look at him, and quickly poured it in. At that time, she didn't know if it was because of the heater in the shop, but she felt that her face became very hot and her heart was beating fast. But she pretended as if nothing had happened, turned around to seal the cup, and handed it to him. Then she slowly put the cork in the bottle, stared at the 3rd button on Dr. Li's chest, and said, "This is our shop's new product." Dr. Li looked at her for a while. Yuan Xiaolu felt that he was looking at her at that time, and smiled, "Merry Christmas." This was the first time in the past year, except for no seal, and it's okay now. It was the first time he said anything else to himself besides "sorry to trouble you." A kind of dazed joy burst in Yuan Xiaolu's chest, like the gorgeous fireworks that were bursting in the sky of the city. She finally summoned the courage to look at Dr. Li's face, but she only saw his profile. He took the milk tea and walked away with his bag. She could only see his back, but he quickly disappeared at the corner of the street. However, this joy that happened on Christmas night also caused her trouble. About the next day, a few young people that were commonly seen on the street appeared in front of the shop. Around the next day, a few young people that were commonly seen on the street appeared in front of the shop. Their left or right eyes were blue. That was because of the electrosensitive lens implanted in the vitreous. This allowed them to immerse themselves in the virtual game world at any time, even forgetting that they were walking on the road. Yuan Xiaolu's impression of this kind of people was limited to TV or movies. They should be the kind of characters who fought on the street and took drugs, then endured in prison until middle age, and then relied on social security benefits to live a miserable life. She quickly lowered her head, not wanting to talk to them. But soon she heard the sound of knuckles knocking on the counter. Several young people gathered in front of the small shop, blocking the afternoon sun. One of them grinned and said, "Little girl, a few cups of milk tea." Yuan Xiaolu put down her phone and stood up, trying to make her expression more natural. "What kind do you want?" "I heard that you have extra alcohol here." "That kind," he said, "a cup of milk tea." "No milk tea." The few of them roared with laughter, as if they had heard an extremely funny joke. Yuan Xiaolu used to hear that these people were more or less neurotic because of long-term abuse of nicotine and long-term abuse of electric stimulation. In serious cases, they would even go crazy. Now that she saw them like this, she was scared. She realized that maybe it was because they saw her last night when she made that cup of milk tea for Dr. Li. She looked under the counter anxiously. The young man saw her gaze, suddenly climbed up the counter and looked inside. He saw the bottle of alcohol. He said in a low, muffled voice and reached for it. Yuan Xiaolu didn't know where she got the courage, but she grabbed her phone and shouted, "You guys are robbers!" Coincidentally, a round-headed street police drone passed by and stopped. The black electronic eyes quickly turned in a circle, flashing red and blue lights crazily. The few youths immediately dispersed and soon disappeared without a trace. But things didn't end there. Dr. Li didn't go to work on the third day, nor did he go to work on the fourth day. On the fifth night, the young man who had appeared in front of the shop 2 days ago appeared again. He walked to the counter with a straight face, stared at Yuan Xiaolu gloomily, and said, "I want a cup of milk tea, with extra alcohol." Yuan Xiaolu stood up, grabbed her phone, and subconsciously looked at the street. But the young man sneered. "What are you looking at? The day before yesterday, when you shouted, 3 of my brothers who were on parole were sent back to prison again. In the future," he raised his chin contemptuously, "I bought it with money." Yuan Xiaolu stared at him. "I won't sell it to you." The young man sneered again. "Fine. Then I'll guard it every day." As he said that, Dr. Li walked out. He was 3 steps away, looking at the two of them. After a while he strode closer. Yuan Xiaolu's eyes lit up. She saw that Dr. Li walked to the young man's side and nodded at her without looking at him. She felt strength return to her body. Ignoring him, she silently turned around and went to make the milk tea. From the corner of her eye, she saw the young man frown and look at Dr. Li up and down, then step back to look at the building next to him. He seemed to want to say something, but didn't. It only took 4 seconds to make a cup of milk tea. She put the cup on the counter, hesitated for a moment, took out the bottle of alcohol, and refilled it. Then she sealed it skillfully. This time, Dr. Li reached out and took it. His fingertips touched Yuan Xiaolu's fingers. Although she was wearing a pair of soft leather gloves, her heart still skipped a beat, and her body let out a soft "Aya." But Dr. Li turned around again and handed the milk tea to the young man. "It's my treat. Let's go." The young man frowned, looked at Dr. Li again, and then sneered. He snatched the cup of milk tea and walked away proudly. "You can meet all kinds of people when you're running a business." Dr. Li watched him walk away, then turned around and said, "Don't be afraid." Then he looked at the wine on the counter, smiled and said hesitantly, "Is this the new product of your chain store, or your new product?" Yuan Xiaolu met his eyes and heard his words. She felt as if there was a fire in her heart, and it suddenly burned. She wanted to move her eyes away, but she seemed to be possessed. She was attracted by his eyes and couldn't move them away. He smiled kindly again. "What's the matter? Is it limited to 1 cup?" Yuan Xiaolu let out an "ah" and quickly turned around. It took her a minute to make the second cup, and she slowly handed it to him. Dr. Li smiled at her again, turned around and walked away. After 3 seconds, 3 seconds as long as a century, Yuan Xiaolu suddenly leaned half of her body out and shouted, "Merry Christmas!" He turned around on the street and raised the cup of milk tea to her. Yuan Xiaolu felt that his whole body was shining. But the trouble wasn't over yet. After that day, the young man would still come. At around 7 o'clock in the evening every day, Yuan Xiaolu would sell a cup to him every day. It was indeed sell. But he would only pay 1 cent each time, and then look at her provocatively. But she didn't want to cause any more trouble. She was afraid that Dr. Li would help her out like that day, and finally anger these people. How could a gentle and kind person like him be a match for them? People like him shouldn't be involved in these things. Chapter 2. The green light turned green, and a cup of milk tea was made and sealed. Yuan Xiaolu took it down and held it in her hand, as if it could keep it warm. But in fact it was better to put it in the machine to keep it warm. However, thinking that this cup would be held in Dr. Li's palm in 10 minutes, she hoped that it would stay in her palm for a little longer. The people on the street gradually became denser, and the number of cars also increased. When the time on the phone changed to 7:29, Yuan Xiaolu stood up, slightly leaned over, and looked at the exit of the building on the left. Soon she saw Dr. Li walking out. He was still carrying that black leather bag, wearing a gray coat. His steps were calm, and there was a faint smile on his face. He smiled like this to everyone, but when he stopped in front of Yuan Xiaolu's shop, she didn't know if it was her illusion. She felt that Dr. Li's smile was gentler. "Thank you." After taking the cup, he took a step away, but then he stopped, as if he suddenly remembered something. "I have to go on a business trip next week." That was all he said, and he nodded at her. Yuan Xiaolu laughed in her heart. She felt that Dr. Li said this to her. "Xiaolu, I have to go on a business trip next week. You don't have to wait for me every day." After saying this, he nodded again, turned around and walked away. Maybe it was because of the small joy in her heart, or maybe it was because of something else. Yuan Xiaolu took a deep breath and said, "Dr. Li." "Yes?" He turned around and blinked. A few months ago, I went to a programming class." Dr. Li was slightly stunned, and then he smiled again. "Artificial intelligence? That's good." Yuan Xiaolu waited for a while. After he blinked again, he said, "I went for an interview with a company. Yes, they asked me to wait for their notice. I think they quite like me, but I don't necessarily want to." Dr. Li thought about it seriously. "It's good. While you're still young, see what you like to do." Some kind of subtle emotion, she didn't know if it was disappointment, quietly spread in her heart. She was silent for a while, and then she gathered her courage and said, "Then I won't be here." Dr. Li smiled, looked at her, and didn't say anything. Yuan Xiaolu bit her lip, and her eyes fell on his third incision again. "Yes, then I have to go to class." "That's good." Dr. Li smiled, and he raised his cup. "See you next week." He took 3 steps forward. Then he heard Yuan Xiaolu's voice, "Dr. Li." "Yes." "Why do you like to add alcohol?" He thought for a while, and then smiled. "It's exciting." The next day, Yuan Xiaolu didn't go to the milk tea shop. But she didn't go far. She put on a white velvet hat and wandered aimlessly on the street. But after wandering around for the whole morning, she found that she had been walking on the streets, near the building where Dr. Li was. It seemed that the closer she got to the building, the more empty she felt when she knew that he wasn't there. But the farther she was, the emptier she felt. Did he know what he meant by his own words? He's a psychiatrist. Shouldn't he understand after listening to a few words? But he didn't say anything. Is he? Many thoughts were swirling in her mind, and she didn't know which one to hold on to. She walked around one corner after another, and finally felt tired. She planned to go home. But just as she took a step forward, she saw a car parked across the street. There were 2 familiar people beside the car. One was the young man who came to her shop every day to buy milk tea, and the other, it was Dr. Li. Yuan Xiaolu stood rooted to the ground. She didn't know why, but she felt that her ears had become more sensitive, and she could even vaguely hear what they were saying. She saw the young man open the car door for Dr. Li with rare politeness, and she heard him say, "Brother Li, my big brother hasn't been in a good mood recently, and I need to trouble you to talk to him." I met a benefactor on the street. I'm not afraid to tell my brothers that Brother Lee and I became friends because of a cup of milk tea. Ha ha ha. Then she saw the familiar and gentle smile on Dr. Lee's face. He walked to the young man, patted him on the shoulder, and sat in the car. The car quickly started and drove to the other end of the street. Yuan Xiaolu stood by the street for a long time. Only when the street lights slowly lit up did she open her mouth. Ah! Her pocket vibrated. She ignored it. After a few seconds the vibration stopped. But only after a short while. It persevered and began to shake again. Yuan Xiaolu slowly took out her mobile phone. She had saved the number in her contacts. Case Technology Interview Miss Lu 1. Chapter 3 Yuan Xiaolu squinted her eyes in Lu Tao's arms. Listening to the news on the TV, and Lu Tao's detailed plan for the coming year, in a half-awake state. She could almost memorize it. Quit her job to start her own business, and catch up with the trend of artificial intelligence. Even if it was just a small shop, like the milk tea shop she used to work at. She would hire a few people from the company. She would write the algorithms, and he would do the operations. The main thing was not to sell milk tea, but to open the first fully intelligent and unmanned experience store in China, which would allow people to experience the future in advance. She was so lazy that she didn't want to talk. She planned to take a shower after Lu Tao's enthusiasm for starting his own business faded. The coming year would be her third year, and she didn't want to bet her future on this trend. But Lu Tao's voice stopped abruptly. After a moment of silence, he sat up from the bed and exclaimed, "I thought it was a TV series." After saying this, he patted Yuan Xiaolu's leg and said, Hey, look at this. Wow, he's so handsome. He looks like that guy from the Psychic Alliance. Lu Kuan, right? Right." Yuan Xiaolu opened her eyes slightly and looked at the TV for a while. It was showing online news, a murder case. It was common for media interviewers to mix in with the official reporters to shoot some hardcore footage and use it to get more traffic online. She glanced at it and saw a blurry face. She was stunned for a moment and then slowly sat up. It was a murder case that happened in an abandoned factory in the suburbs of the city. The victim seemed to have been tortured before death and eventually suffocated to death. According to the analysis, the victim was probably killed by water torture, covering the mouth and nose with a towel, and then pouring water on the towel. Lu Tao had told her about this before, saying that it was a common method used by terrorists. But that face. Yuan Xiaolu slowly opened her mouth and subconsciously tightened her grip on the bedsheets. She didn't realize before that Dr. Lee really looked like that celebrity Lu Kuan. Kill. Don't you think so? No. It's a crime of passion. He's a psychologist. Is he a psychiatrist? Or a psychiatrist? I think this name. Li Si. There's really someone with this name. The world in Yuan Xiaolu's vision faded away like the tide, leaving only the screen in the center of her vision. Lu Tao's voice was faintly discernible, as if it came from the sky. She stared at the screen. It was as if she was staring at a distant and unknown world. She didn't know how much time had passed before she realized that Lu Tao was looking at her in front of her. "What's wrong? Don't be afraid. The security here is good. This kind of thing won't happen." Yuan Xiaolu looked at him in a daze. She slowly lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling for a while. Lu Tao came over and frowned. "What's wrong?" She raised her hand and touched Lu Tao's face, smiling. "I want to drink milk tea." Lu Tao was relieved, looked at her a few more times, and jumped off the bed. "You scared me to death." He walked into the kitchen. Yuan Xiaolu heard the sound of hot water being poured into a cup in Lu Tao's voice. "Do you want more wine?" After a while. She heard the sound of him uncorking the cork. "I've always wanted to ask you. You're a little girl. Why do you like this way of drinking?" Yuan Xiaolu smiled. She thought of many nights, many sunshine, many people and bustling streets. "Because it's exciting," she said softly. Chapter 683. Facing a great demon like Li Yunqin, splitting up the troops wasn't a wise move. But Qin Fengzi also knew that the main force of the attack this time wouldn't be the demon soldiers. facing a powerful great demon. Only another great demon would be able to subdue it. Thus, the vast army would give up on using formations and use brute force instead. These 20,000 people, as well as the 80,000 that would arrive later, would form a formation and provide continuous support to the strong. And the strong would be the 4 profound realm Dragon King, a few dozen profound realm and true realm Yao generals. The situation was extremely dangerous, but Li Yunqin's formation, from what he saw now, wasn't completely set up yet. Qin Fengzi became anxious, but facing such a calm and composed Wei River Dragon King, he subconsciously didn't want to be at a disadvantage. Thus, he forced himself to calm down and said in a low voice, "You guessed it? That purple knight enlightened held back against me, and then you betrayed me. Shinria doesn't like the Dragon King of the 9 Seas, and your people have planted many spies in the 9 Seas Navy." Li Yunqin clapped his hands, as if he was brushing off some dust. "Can't even guess this. I'm afraid you're an idiot." "Then there are too many idiots in the 9 Seas," Qin Fengzi thought in his mind. He tried to smile, but felt the muscles on his face were very stiff. Normal people don't have the guts to guess that Shinryu and the Great Ancestor are working together. That's why they're stupid. Li Yunqin paced a few steps on the stone pillar with his hands behind his back, and looked up at the vast army in the distance, as if he was looking at a scenery that had nothing to do with him. "All right. Now tell me, what is your lifeless immortal sect doing in the vast sea?" Qin Fengzi felt that he had spent more time in front of Li Yunqin than he had in the past year. Of course, he wasn't the only one who often had this thought. He opened his mouth and asked a very meaningless question. "You? How do you know?" Li Yunqin looked at him. With the death of a demon soldier, the Great Soul-Seizing Formation can only refine 30% of its demonic energy, and the remaining 70% is wasted. I also like to play with array formations. If I can't guess this, wouldn't I be a fool? Qin Fengzi coughed. But how did Dragon King know it was in the vast sea? Even he himself did not notice that when he said Dragon King, there was a hint of awe in his voice. "I guessed." Li Yunqin frowned. "Speak." Qin Fengzi realized that the Wei River Lord's guess actually meant no comment. He hesitated for a moment, wondering what this Wei River Lord meant by the word speak. But just as he thought of this, he was taken aback. A thought popped up in his head. When he saw her just now, his expression was extremely indifferent. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment. Qin Fengzi originally thought that this person's style was always like this. But now, he suddenly realized, perhaps he really was waiting for this moment. He sent someone to inform the vast sea army, and predicted that the vast sea lord would definitely search for the lifeless immortal sex men in the army. He also predicted that he was at his wit's end, and that his last resort was to seek refuge with him? This Wei River Lord. Qin Fengzi stared at him. Li Yunqin laughed. "Oh, you realized that you were tricked? It doesn't feel good to be in the middle of it." He raised his eyes and looked into the distance. The vast sea army had already advanced 20 li into the formation. The formation was already in place. But you still have to live up to your expectations. I'm just doing it for free. You didn't live up to your expectations, so it's fine if you die. Since you didn't die, it seems you want to live. Li Yunqin said softly. The previous Taoist master Ziyi was a good person. I hope you are an interesting person. There are some things that you might not be able to say, so I'll ask you what you might know. You have a formation in the vast sea. That formation, who is it used to deal with? Qin Fengzi sighed in his heart. He originally thought that he had relied on his quick wits to save himself. But in the end, he found out that the path he had taken was designed by someone else. This feeling was not good at all. But he did not want to die. But he also did not want to betray the immortal sect. Thus, he thought for a moment and said softly, that is a soul-gathering spirit-seizing formation. It collects the demonic energy in the 9 seas and transforms it into spirit energy for us lifeless immortal sect's demonic cultivators to use. It is not used to deal with anyone. Li Yunqin stared at him for a while. His gaze was very gentle before, but at this moment, it became like a poisonous snake about to pounce. Qin Fengzi felt his hair stand on end from his stare. Then, He saw Li Yunxin walk over with his hands behind his back and take a closer look. He tried to make eye contact with Li Yunxin for a while. But soon, he noticed that the other's eyes seemed to have some kind of soul-stealing power. So he hurriedly looked away and said softly, "Dragon King, the formation that the vast army has activated. Once it takes shape, with the help of the spirit energy in the world, the demonic energy of tens of thousands of people will multiply. Lord Vast Sea is already a very difficult opponent to deal with the addition of the 3 Dragon Kings and those generals. I'm afraid things will become very troublesome." But Li Yunxin still looked at him attentively. He opened his mouth, but could only bite the bullet and continue. "It is still Dragon King who should make the first move. We cannot let that formation form. What you said is true." Li Yunxin retracted his gaze and nodded. "It seems that you really do not know what that formation is for. Ah, then let me give you a hint." Li Yunxin did not pay attention to the vast army's formation that he mentioned, as if he still did not care about them. "Do you know that there is a sea cave in the sea? That sea cave that is especially rich in spirit energy, as if it is the spiritual energy hub of the surrounding heaven and earth? This, I know. There are also underground caves on land." Qin Fengzi still did not understand what he was trying to say. After saying this, he uneasily looked down at the stone pillar, at the thousands of crossbow soldiers. Just now, these crossbow soldiers had displayed an unimaginably great power. If he first used these crossbow soldiers to attack the formation core of the vast army. But he saw Li Yunxin wave his hand. The thousands of soldiers that were originally like stone statues immediately turned into flying ash, as if they had already experienced the baptism of time for trillions of years, and had long since decayed. Qin Fengzi was stunned. He heard Li Yunxin say, "Don't even think about those things. The original world's wish power is too weak. It can only be used once, and then becomes useless. There is indeed a limit." "Then what if I tell you that there are skeletons in both the underground cave and the sea cave?" "Skeletons? Your lifeless immortal sect is very resourceful. Do you know about the skeletons at the bottom of Cloudy Mountain?" Usually, Qin Fengzi felt that he was a smart person, and sometimes he liked to ask his smart disciples to figure out what he meant. But only now did he realize how annoying he was back then. He was completely unable to keep up with this Wei River Dragon King's jumping thoughts. What critical value? I can't figure it out at all. The only thing he understood was when he said skeletons. But after thinking about it for a while he said, "This? I know. It is said that those things under Cloudy Mountain unleash a great power. Every underground cave, and every sea cave has skeletons buried in them." Li Yunxin interrupted him. "I heard that skeletons are also called prehistoric ancient demons. They are the ancestors of demons. They once wanted to destroy the world, but were suppressed by an expert. I've dealt with these things before. They can easily be reborn from flesh and blood, using demonic energy. Now that your lifeless immortal sect's vast ocean formation is set up in the sea cave, and you use the formation to pour a lot of converted demonic energy into it, I guess you want to revive that prehistoric ancient demon." Li Yunxin's tone sounded like he was just chatting. At the bottom of Cloudy Mountain, there were 3 ancient demons sharing tens of thousands of demonic energy, and in the end, even the profound Realm Peak Dragon Sun was almost no match for them. Now that you've created one, it can enjoy more demonic energy than when it was in Cloudy Mountain, and it can last longer than that time. Knowing this, I want you to think as a member of the lifeless immortal sect, what is the most likely thing that your ancestor will do with it? Qin Fengzi felt that his brain was a bit numb. It was not that he was an idiot, but that although the ancestor liked him, with his position in the lifeless immortal sect, it was still impossible for him to come into contact with so many terrifying secrets. Now that Li Yunxin poured all of it into his mouth, he was unable to digest it for a while. But at this time, Li Yunxin displayed astonishing patience. If Qin Fengzi knew what he was like in the past. "Let me ask you another question. What does your ancestor want to do the most? For example, did he say what is his responsibility?" Qin Fengzi, whose mind was in a mess, subconsciously said, Reviving the celestial sect is his responsibility. Oh, then it makes sense. Li Yunxin nodded slightly. Previously, you all wanted the treasures and cultivation techniques in my hands, and were all impatient. Although I don't know who that 10,000-year-old ancestor of yours is. But since he knows how to cultivate, he might have been a member of the celestial sect. Ha! This kind of person always has some goals. Seeing the decline of the celestial sect on the continent, he wants to support the orthodox celestial sect. Sure. Qin Fengzi was dumbfounded. He even felt that he might have been under some kind of spell from Li Yunxin. In just a few short sentences, he was like the most obedient apprentice, answering whatever was asked. Before, he had wanted to answer carefully, but now, it was as if he had poured out something himself. But he had only said 4 sentences, including the last one. He realized that his previous thought was correct. This guy was too scary. He had never seen anyone who could obtain information so efficiently. If he was originally on Li Yunxin's side, he would probably have to bow his head at this moment. But they were enemies in the past, and his dignity prevented him from bowing down so quickly. Qin Fengzi tried to take the initiative, at least not like a passive student, and after being stunned for a moment he said, "But even if what you said is right, knowing these things, how do we deal with them?" He pointed to the surface of the ocean, and began to wonder if escaping here was a wise choice. They have already set up their formation, and they are less than 50 miles away from us. A small fry like me will not be regretted if I die, but what about the Dragon King? As he said this, another thought appeared in his mind. The Dragon King might have a dragon palace. But once the formation is set up, they will cut off this path. I'm afraid the Dragon King won't be able to use the Dragon Palace to escape. Therefore, he realized that as a necromancer, this was the best opportunity for him to gain something. If he could get out of here alive in the future, he wanted to know and see the whole picture of the unfinished formation that Li Yunxin had set up on the stone pillar. This way River Dragon King smiled coldly. Guess. Then he leaped into the air and shouted, "Vast Dragon King, do you still want to fight? If you don't fight, I'm afraid your nest will be turned upside down." Chapter 684. As soon as he finished speaking, a white light suddenly rose up from the vast army and appeared in front of him in the blink of an eye. But Li Yunxin had one hand behind his back, and his body didn't move at all. He waved his other hand violently, and with a loud bang, he smashed the incoming object into the sea, causing a wave to rise up into the sky. Then the vast Dragon King's voice echoed on the surface of the sea. "I let you live before, but now you want to die. I will grant your wish." In the next moment, 3 figures flew over. One was holding a halberd, one a spear, and one a broadsword. Even though they were dozens of feet away, they slashed out a violent aura that whistled towards the stone pillar. But Li Yunxin still didn't move. With a wave of his bamboo fan, he blocked the 3 auras one after another. But the 3 demons were all profound realm generals of the vast army, and they were also supported by formations. So how powerful were their 3 attacks? Although they didn't push Li Yunxin back, the wounds on his hand and face that hadn't completely healed burst open, and tiny drops of blood splashed out like mist. Although the first attack didn't succeed, seeing that the Dragon King of the continent was actually injured, the 3 generals were happy. Their bodies didn't even stop, and they rushed forward again. However, Li Yunxin once again used her previous ability. Her body shook, and a precious armor and divine weapon immediately appeared. Not only did it cover the wounds on his face, but it also greatly increased his momentum. At this moment, he was holding a purple gold coiling dragon staff in his hand, and with a thought, the treasure whizzed out to meet the 3 attacking generals. Only the sound of weapons clashing could be heard, and the 3 people who were rushing over were actually pushed back several feet. But although it was a treasure, it could only be controlled with a thought, and without demon power, it could only rely on its own hard material to withstand the attacks of the 3 profound realm demons. Looking at the staff again, it was already riddled with wounds, and its light was gradually fading. Anyone would feel distressed if they saw it in such a state. A treasure that could force 3 big monsters to fight with its mind would probably be useless after this battle. The 3 demons weren't willing to give up, and were about to rush forward again, but they heard Lord Vast Expanse's calm voice. Retreat. Again. This retreat was directed at the 3 Profound Realm demons. That shout of again was directed at the other 3 Profound Realm demon generals. The vast sea was incomparably vast, and it could be said to be filled with talents. Out of all the Dragon King on the sea, Lord Boundless had the most troops, and his subordinates were as many as the clouds. It wouldn't be difficult for him to assemble a few Profound Realm, and a dozen True Realm experts. The 3 generals knew their Jun Shang's intentions, so they didn't linger and turned to leave. Before Li Yunxin could use his treasure to give chase, another 3 demon generals arrived. They were still fighting in the same way as before. The 3 of them pounced forward at the same time, attacking fiercely without any regard for their lives. Li Yunxin laughed coldly. Let's take turns to wear him down. I'll play with you. With a wave of his hand, the scarred purple-gold coiling dragon staff fell into the sea, and 2 flying swords, one male and one female, appeared in front of him. He mouthed a sword incantation and pointed with his finger. The 2 flying swords turned into 2 rays of light, one purple and one green, and flew towards the enemy. The power of these 2 flying swords was slightly greater than that of the staff just now. They flew up and down, lightning flashing, and in the blink of an eye, a demon general's head was pierced through. But that demon general was also strange. After one of his heads exploded, another one grew out in the blink of an eye. On the other hand, the flying swords were stained with his blood, and their light dimmed greatly. Finally, the 3 generals seized the opportunity and used all their strength to chop it into 3 pieces. And both pieces fell into the sea. When they shattered, they let out an indistinct sigh. It was actually a godly weapon with a spiritual soul sealed inside. Li Yunxin willed the godly weapon to shatter. Just as the 3 generals were about to attack, they heard Lord Boundless say in a deep voice, "Retreat." Again. The 3 generals didn't want to continue fighting, and turned to leave. At the same time, another 3 generals whizzed over from the vast army. It took less than a quarter of an hour for Li Yunxin to lose 2 godly weapons in a row. Both sides seemed to be attacking and defending, but they all knew that Li Yunxin was at a disadvantage. Once a demon general was exhausted or injured, Lord Boundless would immediately order them to retreat and regroup, and then they could fight again in a moment. However, if the Dragon King's divine weapon was broken, then it was broken. How could it be repaired? Qin Fengzi guessed what Dragon King was thinking, and couldn't help but say in a low voice, "Dragon King, this is the rolling blade formation. You have to think of a way." Although his cultivation level was low, his mind was still sharp. Earlier, Li Yunxin used his folding fan to receive the attacks from the 3 demon generals. Although he didn't move at all, and it was very beautiful, and he also displayed shocking strength, he was still injured. That was why he used the armor to protect himself, and used his mind to control the godly weapon to fight from a distance. He used the power of the godly weapon and armor to reduce the pressure on his body. But this also meant that he was indeed in a state of exhaustion. The injuries caused by the battle a day ago had indeed caused a terrible impact on him. If this continued, the godly weapon would eventually be exhausted. What should he do then? As soon as he finished speaking, Dragon King's laughter echoed across the ocean. "You have many godly weapons and armor, but I also have many fierce generals under my command. Let's see how long you can last. What other tricks do you have? Quickly use them." But Li Yunxin didn't make a sound. After losing another Rui scepter and iron ruler, he once again forced the 3 attacking demon generals to retreat. But this time, when the 3 demon generals retreated, he took out a long blade and chased after them, as if he also realized that there was no end to this battle, and that it was better to make them lose some people. But halfway through the chase, a figure suddenly jumped up from the water. It was Dragon King Chu Liao. This Dragon King's cultivation level wasn't something the 3 demon generals could compare to. His palm glowed with a golden light, and with a flip of his hand, He grabbed the hilt of the long blade and snatched it away. The ocean was filled with thunderous cheers. This Dragon King Chu Liao gripped the blade tightly, laughing as he cupped his fists towards Li Yunxin. Since I've accepted this treasure of Lord Wei River, I owe you a favor. I'll definitely not let Lord Wei River die a miserable death later. Ha 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 ha. At this time, the expressionless Li Yunxin's expression finally became a little ugly. He stared at Dragon King Chu Liao and said in a low voice, I have many of these things. Let's see if you're still alive to take them or use them. But Dragon King Chu Liao didn't care about his harsh words. He chuckled and dived back into the water. At this time, a quarter of an hour had passed. Li Yunxin frowned and shouted, Boundless Dragon King, 2 days ago, you said that you would fight with me again. But now you're sending these useless things to make a fool of yourself? Aren't you ashamed? You'll wait until your nest is overturned then. I know what Lord Wei River is thinking. Dragon King Chu Liao finally appeared in front of the army. But his aura was much more majestic. His wide throne was lifted up by the waves, surrounded by his generals and guards, as if he was a celestial general. His expression was heavy, but his voice was long and full of mockery. You've provoked me time and time again, plotted against me so that I can fight you one-on-one. Hee hee. Although I don't know what methods you have to be so confident that you can defeat me. But I know what Lord Wei River is thinking. This method of yours is effective against those stupid demons and demons on the continent. But how dare you use it against me? I'm in the middle of the army. How could I ignore the bigger picture and fight against you? Humph. He sneered. Now that the demonic energy in my formation is endless, even if I exhaust you to death, you won't be able to see me make a move. I want to see how many more treasures you can waste. As he spoke, the demon generals under his command attacked Li Yunxin again. Li Yunxin took out 2 more treasures to fight with them. He stood in midair and sneered. Exhaust? I have so many treasures. Let's see who's the one who can't afford it. I'm afraid that in another day your nest, hee hee. Lord Haohan interrupted him again. In the end, there's no end to it. So what if those people from Lifeless Immortal sect occupy it? I'm the Dragon King of the Wild Sea, not some gate-guarding Dragon Island. Now my army is here, my fierce generals are here, and the sea is full of inexhaustible rations. Do you think this is your land? He narrowed his eyes. You should think carefully. What's the difference between the land and the sea? In this sea, everywhere is home. What's there to be afraid of? Isn't that right? As soon as he finished, the demons all agreed loudly, causing the sea to shake. Lord Haohan finally laughed and pointed at Li Yunxin. Let me tell you what's going to happen next. A few brothers on Penglai Island have already killed their way out. They'll meet up with me soon. Those onlookers on the ocean. Do you think they like Lifeless Immortal sect? When the 8 of us Dragon Kings gather together, we'll occupy half of the ocean first. At most, we'll start from scratch and recruit more soldiers, and we'll be able to defend for 100 years. But I'm afraid you can't afford to waste 100 years. Li Yunxin's expression turned cold. He was about to speak, but Lord Haohan said again. Why? Are you thinking about that red-clothed female demon again? Ha ha ha. You can only blame yourselves for being too impatient. Look what this is. He stretched out his hand, and a small round bead appeared in his palm. The others naturally didn't know what it was, but Dragon King said coldly. You're stubbornly resisting here. I just found out that you're counting on that female demon. I also know that you and Lord Donghai were conspiring and promised him benefits. Unfortunately, with the change in Lifeless Immortal sect, Lord Donghai also knows that he was tricked by you guys. You guys originally planned to ask Lord Donghai to release that female demon to attack from both sides. But I just received news from Lord Donghai. He's already forsaken the dark for the light, and is leading his troops to surround that female demon. If you want to wait for him, I'm afraid you can't wait anymore. At this point, Li Yunxin finally stopped talking. His face was so gloomy that it looked like water was about to drip out. Seeing him like this, Lord Haohan didn't say anything else. He shouted. Again! Another 5 demon generals, each holding a sword and a spear, with a cold smile on their faces, flew over. Qin Fengzi heard these words clearly. He finally couldn't keep calm anymore. Previously, when the lifeless immortal sect was exposed, although his life was in danger, his mind was still clear. That was because it happened too suddenly. He didn't have time to think too much. But now, when he thought that he had escaped, he found himself in a desperate situation again. He couldn't be as calm as before. When Li Yunxin was fighting with Lord Haohan, he kept thinking about why this Wei River Lord was so confident. What was he relying on? Now that he heard Lord Haohan's words, he finally understood. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.